I spent 10 years fortifying my family eco-resort empire, but it only took 10 seconds for my older brother to steal it, and 3 days for me to legally steal it back. The sound of Jason laughing echoed off the polished koa wood panels of the Honolulu law office. That sound was the exact moment my loyalty died. My name is Taylor Hernandez. I am 32 years old, living in Hawaii, and before I explain how I turned my brother's unearned inheritance into his personal financial prison, welcome to Intimately Told Stories. Drop a comment to let me know your age and what state or country you are listening from today. The air conditioning inside Mr. Kealoha downtown office hummed a low, steady baritone, fighting a losing battle against the sweltering August heat pressing against the glass. Beyond the tinted windows, the blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched out toward the horizon, a view reserved for those who owned the island rather than those who simply worked it. I sat rigid in a high-backed leather chair with my spine pressed straight against the upholstery. My hands rested flat on my lap. Mr. Kealoha turned a crisp page of the legal dossier. To my eldest son, Jason, I leave the entirety of the Hernandez Eco Resort holdings. This includes the Wailea beachfront properties, the North Shore retreat centers, all corporate operating accounts, and the primary residential estates. Silence settled over the conference table. It was not a respectful quiet. It was the breathless vacuum that precedes a tropical storm. Then the sound broke. Jason laughed. It started as a low chuckle bubbling up from his chest, before erupting into a full, resonant scoff that bounced off the mahogany walls of the room. He shifted his weight, leaning back so far his chair groaned in protest. He ran a hand through his sun-bleached hair. A deep tan marked the countless hours he spent chasing swells in Maui, while I navigated vendor disputes in windowless back offices. His amusement was not subtle. It was a victory lap performed right across my chest. For a decade, my official title was financial controller. In practice, I was the spine of the Hernandez operation. I balanced the precarious ledgers. I executed the high-stakes logistics required to sustain luxury tourism on a remote volcanic archipelago. I sourced the organic local farm supply chains, negotiated the military base hospitality contracts, and answered panicked phone calls from general managers at 3 a.m. when the island power grids failed. My 20s were measured in fiscal quarters, spreadsheets, and the faint, permanent ache behind my eyes from staring at glowing monitors. Jason spent his 20s documenting his life in vibrant, filtered photographs. Board shorts, surfboards, VIP bottle service. He possessed the family name and the charismatic smile, two assets my father apparently deemed more valuable than my sweat equity. Mr. Kealoha cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. His eyes darted toward me, holding a fleeting glint of pity before returning to the thick parchment. To my daughter Taylor, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box 402 at the First Hawaiian Bank downtown branch. He reached into his leather briefcase. The brass clasps snapped open with a metallic crack. He withdrew a small, faded manila envelope and slid it across the smooth surface of the table. It stopped inches from my folded hands. I reached out. My fingertips brushed the coarse paper. I tipped the envelope. A single rusted key slipped out, landing on the wood with a dull, heavy clink. The brass was oxidized, speckled with green and brown decay. It carried the faint metallic scent of age and neglect. It looked like a piece of forgotten junk, unearthed from a scrapyard rather than bequeathed in a multi-million-dollar estate transfer. I ran my thumb over the jagged teeth, feeling the sharp, uneven grooves. A sprawling eco-resort empire for the son. A corroded piece of metal for the daughter. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. A smirk played on his lips, pulling the corners of his mouth upward in mock sympathy. Tough break, Tay. But hey, maybe there is a nice savings bond in there. You can finally take that vacation you are always complaining you need. I ignored him, turning my attention to the woman seated to his left. Patricia, my mother, sat with immaculate posture. She wore a tailored linen suit that cost more than my first car, her pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. Throughout the reading, she had remained a statue, her expression neutral, her eyes fixed forward. "Mom," I said softly. It was not a plea, it was a test. A final calibration to see where the allegiances truly lay. Patricia slowly turned her head. Her gaze met mine, cold and unyielding, devoid of maternal warmth. She did not see a daughter who had sacrificed her youth to keep the family solvent. She saw a worker who had outlived her usefulness, a lingering liability. "Be grateful you got anything, Taylor," Patricia stated, her tone flat and precise. "Your brother is the face of this family. He has an image to maintain. The business requires a certain presence." The betrayal did not arrive like a sudden blow. It seeped into my veins like a slow-acting chill, freezing the last remaining embers of my loyalty. The injustice tightened my throat, yet my breathing remained even. I felt no urge to cry. I felt no desire to scream, throw the key, or demand an explanation from the lawyer. The time for emotional outbursts had passed. I realized with crystalline clarity that I had never been a member of the Hernandez family. I was the hired help, kept around only until the ledger balanced and the throne was ready for the golden child to inherit. I picked up the rusted key. The oxidized metal felt rough against my skin, a stark contrast to the polished veneer of the people sitting across from me. I slipped it into the pocket of my blazer. "Understood," I replied. My voice did not waver. Jason chuckled again, shaking his head. "Good. Glad we are all on the same page. Now, if we are done here, Kealoha, I have a tea time at Waialae in an hour. We can hash out the transition paperwork next week." As Jason stood adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke shirt, a specific memory of my father surfaced. David Hernandez had been a hard man, built from the volcanic rock of the islands he conquered. He rarely offered praise, but he often dealt in warnings. We had stood together on the shoreline of our first property years ago, watching the king tides erode the sandy beach. "A man who builds his house on sand," my father had muttered, watching a retaining wall collapse into the surf, "will lose it to the tide." At the time, I thought he was lecturing me on coastal engineering. Sitting in the frigid law office, watching my brother parade his unearned victory, the true meaning of the phrase clicked into place. Jason believed he had won. He believed he walked away with the kingdom, leaving me with scrap metal. He did not realize the buildings he just inherited were heavy, vulnerable, and perched on an unstable foundation. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I did not look at my mother or my brother. I simply gave Mr. Kealoha a curt nod, turned on my heel, and walked toward the heavy glass doors. The rusted key sat heavy in my pocket, anchoring me to a new reality. I walked out of the icy air conditioning and into the blistering Hawaiian sun, leaving the obedient daughter behind in the conference room. The mourning period was over. The audit had begun. The transition from the sterile chill of the law office to the suffocating humidity of downtown Honolulu felt like stepping into a furnace. The glare of the midday sun bounced off the concrete sidewalks, forcing me to squint as I walked toward the valet stand. Standing in the shade of a large banyan tree was Ashley. My sister-in-law was busy adjusting the ring light clipped to her latest smartphone. She wore a silk sundress that cost a month of wages for our housekeeping staff and oversized designer sunglasses that hid half her face. Ashley noticed me approaching and lowered her phone. A condescending smile spread across her lips. The kind of smile you give a stray dog you have no intention of feeding. "Well, Taylor," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "look on the bright side. Now that Jason and your mother are handling the heavy lifting, you can finally take a real vacation. Maybe focus on yourself for a change. Get out there and find a man. You have been hiding in that dark office for way too long." I did not blink. I did not offer a sharp retort or defend the 60-hour work weeks that had kept her designer wardrobe funded. I simply stared at her, absorbing the sheer audacity of her statement. Ashley possessed the unique ability to turn genuine cruelty into a casual lifestyle tip. Before the silence could stretch into open hostility, the valet pulled up to the curb. The vehicle was a custom Porsche Macan painted in a rare shade of chalk white. The engine purred with expensive precision. Jason walked out of the building a few moments later, sliding his sunglasses over his eyes. He tossed a $20 bill to the valet and opened the passenger door for his wife. They did not look back at me. As the luxury SUV merged into the heavy afternoon traffic, I watched the customized license plate disappear down the avenue. I knew that license plate. I knew the exact vehicle identification number. I knew it because 11 months ago, I was the one who processed the wire transfer to the dealership. Jason had submitted the purchase order under the guise of acquiring a premium transport vehicle for our elite resort guests. I knew it was a lie the moment the paperwork crossed my desk, but Patricia had signed off on the authorization, overriding my objections. That vehicle had never transported a single guest. It was a chariot purchased with corporate operating funds, used exclusively to ferry Ashley to beachfront yoga classes and high-end boutiques in Waikiki. Standing alone on the curb, the exhaust fumes mixing with the salty ocean breeze, the reality of my existence crystallized. My family never viewed me as a daughter. I was a human calculator. I was a disposable safety net installed to catch their financial mistakes and ensure their lavish lifestyle never skipped a beat. I slid my hand into the pocket of my blazer. My fingertips traced the rough, jagged edges of the rusted key Mr. Kealoha had given me. The coarse metal grounded me. To survive the immediate aftermath, I knew I needed to control the narrative. Jason and Patricia expected me to throw a tantrum. They expected me to hire my own attorneys and launch a messy, expensive legal battle for a piece of the estate. A direct attack would only validate their belief that I was a bitter, jealous sibling. I needed them arrogant. I needed them complacent. I needed to become invisible. I walked 3 blocks to where I had parked my modest 4-door sedan. The interior was sweltering, but I did not turn on the air conditioning right away. I sat in the stifling heat, pulled out my phone, and opened my professional networking profile. If they wanted me to be the defeated outcast, I would give them a masterpiece of a performance. I tapped the edit button on my profile. I changed my current title from Financial Controller of Hernandez Eco Resorts to Former Financial Controller. Then I activated the feature that signaled to recruiters I was open to work. But I did not stop there. A subtle digital update was not enough. I needed to create a paper trail of desperation. I spent the next 45 minutes sitting in the sweltering car drafting cover letters and submitting applications to rival hotel chains across the island. I did not apply for executive roles. I deliberately targeted mid-level bookkeeping positions and junior accounting jobs, roles that paid a fraction of my true market value. Positions that required me to report to managers who had far less experience than I did. I applied to handle payroll for housekeeping departments and inventory tracking for hotel restaurants. The Honolulu hospitality industry is a notoriously small, interconnected circle. General managers talk over golf. Human resource directors share gossip during charity luncheons and fundraising galas. I knew with full confidence that by tomorrow morning, my resume would cross the desks of people who socialized directly with my brother and my mother. The rumor mill would ignite like dry brush in the summer heat. Taylor Hernandez is out. Taylor Hernandez is desperate for a paycheck. I started the engine and merged onto the highway heading toward the North Shore. As the coastal landscape shifted from dense city high-rises to lush green mountains, I pictured the scene currently unfolding at the Waialae Country Club. Jason and Patricia would be sitting on the shaded lanai overlooking the 18th hole. They would be sipping expensive rum cocktails, clinking their crystal glasses in quiet celebration. I could almost hear my mother telling her affluent friends that the transition was a necessary step for the future of the brand. She would sigh and say that I simply lacked the visionary leadership required to manage a modern hospitality empire. Jason would nod, playing the role of the reluctant but dutiful heir, stepping up to save the family legacy from his overworked, uninspired sister. They were drinking to my demise, entirely convinced I was powerless. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Alcohol and arrogance make a dangerous combination for anyone standing on a fragile foundation. I arrived at my residence just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the property. The house was a small 2-bedroom bungalow located on the far edge of our primary eco-resort property. It was technically owned by the family trust, but I had lived there for 7 years, treating it as my sanctuary away from the endless chaos of the main hotel lobby. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was stale. I walked into the kitchen and set my keys on the granite counter. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusted key, placing it right next to them. I stared at the piece of oxidized brass. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. My father was a calculating man who never did anything without a deliberate purpose. He would not leave me a piece of junk just to mock me. That was Jason's style, not his. The key meant something important. It belonged to a lockbox, a storage unit, or a private vault, but investigating the key would have to wait. My quiet retreat from the law office was not a surrender. It was the strategic repositioning of an apex predator. I was stepping back into the shadows, gathering my resources and observing the terrain. I knew the access codes. I knew the vendor payment schedules. I knew every structural weakness in the company digital architecture because I built it. I walked over to the large bay window in my living room, looking out at the manicured lawns of the resort. Tomorrow, the island gossip would paint me as a tragic failure. But tonight, I was the only person who knew the true state of the board. As I watched a pair of groundskeepers pack up their landscaping tools for the evening, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen lit up with a new email notification. The sender was Jason. The subject line contained a formal legal tag followed by 3 words: Notice to vacate. I smiled, feeling the cool precision of anticipation wash over me. The trap was already setting itself. The morning sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the Ko'olau Range when the sound of crunching gravel shattered the quiet of my property. I stood in the kitchen holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. Through the bay window, I watched a pristine black Range Rover park at an angle that intentionally blocked my driveway. The engine cut off. Heavy doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Jason marched up the slate walkway wearing designer golf attire that looked pristine and untouched by actual physical exertion. Trailing a few steps behind him was our mother. Patricia held the designer handbag like a shield. She wore oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses hiding her eyes from the early light and perhaps from the reality of what she was helping her son execute. I set my mug on the granite counter. I unlocked the front door before they could knock. Jason did not offer a greeting. He pushed past me into the foyer, bringing the scent of expensive cologne and unearned confidence into my living space. Patricia hovered near the threshold, refusing to step onto the woven sisal rug. She scanned the modest interior of the bungalow with a tight, pinched expression. "We are not here to chat," Taylor, Jason announced. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, slapping it onto the entryway console table. Notice to vacate. You have 48 hours to pack your things and hand over the keys. I looked down at the paper. It lacked an official court seal or a notary stamp. It was a standard template downloaded from the internet, hastily filled out with blue ink. Legally, it held the weight of a grocery receipt. Pointing out legal deficiencies to an entitled man only prolongs the conversation. I picked up the paper, scanning the handwritten lines. "Why the rush?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and devoid of the panic he so desperately wanted to witness. "The estate transition is not finalized." Patricia let out a sharp sigh from the doorway. "Do not make this difficult, Taylor. Jason has plans for this plot. Ashley needs a dedicated space for her brand collaborations. The natural lighting here is apparently perfect for a content creation studio. They are going to bulldoze this old structure next week, a content studio." I had spent 7 years in this bungalow. I had negotiated multi-million-dollar resort expansions from the dining room table during hurricane lockdowns. I had spent countless sleepless nights analyzing quarterly tax projections under the dim glow of the kitchen pendant lights. Now the walls that housed a decade of my dedication were going to be leveled, so my sister-in-law could unbox gifted skincare products on camera. I looked at Jason. He stood with his arms crossed, a smug grin playing on his face. He fed on the perceived power dynamic. "Hand over the administrative access codes," Jason demanded. "The master passwords for the vendor portals, the server credentials, the payroll systems. I need everything transferred to my email by noon. You are no longer authorized to access Hernandez properties or internal networks." He snapped his fingers at our mother. Patricia unzipped her handbag and withdrew a thick manila folder, holding it out toward me. "This is a standard severance and liability release," Jason explained, tapping the thick stack of papers. "It formally terminates your employment with the estate. It also waives your right to sue me or the company for any perceived grievances. You sign this, you give me the codes, and we walk away clean. I never have to see you meddle in my business again." I took the folder from Patricia. The weight of the document felt substantial in my hands. I walked over to the kitchen island, spreading the pages out across the smooth surface. Jason followed, pacing the length of the room. "Sign it, Tay. Do not drag this out into some pathetic legal drama. You have no leverage. You have no funds to fight me in court. Just sign the paper and take whatever dignity you have left." I ignored his taunts. My eyes tracked down the dense paragraphs of legal jargon. Mr. Kealoha had likely drafted this standard contract for our corporate terminations years ago. I recognized the boilerplate language. I read through the non-disparagement clauses, the confidentiality agreements, and the forfeiture of future estate claims. Then, near the bottom of page 4, I found the specific phrasing I was looking for. The clause detailed the relinquishment of company property. It stated that upon termination, the employee must return all assets owned, financed, or subsidized by Hernandez Eco Resorts. However, it also contained a reciprocal protection. It explicitly certified that the company surrendered any and all claims to intellectual property, external vendor contracts, or digital assets developed independently by the employee under a separate corporate entity prior to their executive appointment. My pulse gave a single, steady thud. When I built the proprietary booking software in the vendor management network 10 years ago, I was not officially the financial controller. I was a desperate college graduate trying to save my father's failing reservation system. I had registered those digital assets under a private, independent, limited liability company. The resort had merely been licensing them from me. By demanding I sign this specific document, Jason was not just severing my employment. He was blindly and legally relinquishing the rights to the very digital infrastructure that kept his newly inherited empire running. He was handing me the keys to the kingdom while ordering me out of the castle. I picked up a pen from the counter. A faint smile touched the corners of my mouth. I could not help it. The sheer poetic irony of his demand was too rich to ignore. "You find this funny?" Jason asked, his voice pitching up an octave. His smugness faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Not funny," I replied. "Just thorough." I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line. I signed my name with deliberate, precise strokes. I flipped to the final page and signed again. I gathered the document, tapped the edges against the granite counter to align them, and handed the stack back to my brother. He snatched the folder from my grip. His chest puffed out, his confidence returning in full force. He had secured the signature. He had won the interaction. "I will email you the administrative access codes within the hour," I told him. "You will have full control over the systems. I will have my personal belongings packed and out of this house by tomorrow evening." Jason stared at me. He had braced himself for tears. He had prepared for a shouting match, a desperate plea for more time, or a negotiation for a severance package. My immediate, unresisting compliance short-circuited his expectations. He looked at Patricia, who offered a tight, approving nod. "Well," Jason stammered slightly before recovering his arrogant posture. "Glad you finally learned how to follow directions. Make sure you leave the spare keys on the counter." He let out a short, triumphant laugh, turning his back on me. He walked out the front door with the swagger of a conqueror. Patricia lingered for a moment. She looked around the kitchen one last time, her gaze cold and distant. "It is for the best, Taylor," she murmured. She stepped out into the morning heat, pulling the door shut behind her. The lock clicked into place, echoing through the sudden silence of the bungalow. I walked back to the bay window and watched the black Range Rover reverse out of my driveway, throwing loose gravel onto the grass. The exhaust plumed as Jason accelerated down the private access road, eager to return to his luxury lifestyle. I stood in the quiet house, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. Jason believed he had just executed a masterful power play. He believed he had forcefully evicted a nuisance and claimed a valuable piece of real estate for his wife' vanity project. He was so blinded by his own entitlement that he failed to review the property management files I had updated just last month. The ground beneath the Hawaiian Islands is constantly shifting. This specific parcel of land was situated over a dormant lava tube, making the soil notoriously unstable. 3 weeks ago, a structural engineering firm had conducted an inspection. They found severe microfractures in the concrete foundation of this bungalow. The structure was slowly sinking into the porous volcanic rock. The City Building Commission had issued a mandatory remediation notice. The foundation required deep pilings to be driven into the bedrock, a complex engineering process that carried an estimated cost of $200,000. The deadline for compliance was the end of the current month. If the repairs were not initiated, the city would levy staggering daily fines and place a hard lien on the overarching estate. By presenting me with an eviction notice and demanding immediate possession of the physical structure, Jason had formally accepted liability for the property. He had legally transferred the impending disaster from my shoulders onto his own ledger. He thought he was kicking me out of a valuable asset. In reality, he had just chained himself to an expensive, sinking ship. He wanted the dirt so badly, he never bothered to check if it could hold his weight. I walked into the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. My brother wanted me gone. I would give him exactly what he asked for. The countdown had started, and I needed to be safely out of the blast radius when the ground finally gave way. I packed the last of my life into 2 large canvas suitcases. The physical detachment from the bungalow was surprisingly simple. I did not leave a sentimental note on the counter. I did not gaze longingly at the walls that had sheltered me for 7 years. I placed the spare keys on the cold granite exactly as Jason had ordered. The brass made a hollow, sharp sound against the stone. I zipped up my bags, wheeled them out the front door, and pulled it shut. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place. The tropical heat hit my face right away, but the air felt different today. It tasted like freedom. I loaded my sedan and drove away from the resort property. I kept my eyes focused on the road ahead, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. My new residence was a modest second-floor apartment in a quiet Honolulu neighborhood, far removed from the manicured tourist zones. The walls were bare and painted a sterile white. The living room contained only a small wooden dining table and a single chair I had purchased from a local thrift store. It was Spartan, plain and unpolished, but it was mine. I set my luggage in the corner and opened my laptop on the table. The screen illuminated the dim room, casting a pale glow across the empty space. It was time to execute the precise terms of my severance agreement. 10 years ago, the Hernandez Empire was running on an antiquated, fragile ledger system. Reservations were frequently lost. Double bookings were a weekly disaster, causing screaming matches in the lobby. My father had hired expensive consultants who provided bloated reports printed on glossy paper, but offered zero practical solutions. I was just out of college working 12-hour shifts trying to manually patch the bleeding corporate arteries. I realized the only way to save the family business was to build a custom digital infrastructure from the ground up. I spent my nights coding testing algorithms and negotiating with independent local tech vendors. I funded the entire development project using my personal savings. Because my father refused to reimburse my external expenses or formally acknowledge my contribution, I registered the software under my own private holding company called Coral Logic. The resort paid my holding company a monthly licensing fee to use the platform. Jason never knew this arrangement existed. He was always too busy chasing waves to understand how the online reservations actually materialized on the front desk monitors. By signing the liability document, he formally terminated that external licensing agreement. I logged into the Coral Logic Administrator portal. The primary dashboard loaded, displaying thousands of active data streams across 4 distinct hotel properties. Green icons blinked, showing guests checking in at the front desk. Valets were logging vehicle tags into the secure parking matrix. Housekeeping staff were marking luxury suites as clean on their digital tablets. Kitchen managers were ordering fresh seafood from local docks using automated purchase orders. The entire heartbeat of the business was pulsing right in front of me on a 13-inch screen. I navigated to the master settings panel. Jason wanted me out of his operation. I was simply complying with his legal directive. I dragged the cursor over the Access Revocation tab. I clicked the button to terminate the application programming interfaces. I severed the automated vendor payment gateways. I disabled the encrypted digital room key protocols. I watched the screen as the blinking green icons turned a stark, angry red. The active connections plummeted from several thousand to 0 in a matter of seconds. With 3 keystrokes, the Hernandez Hospitality Network was blind, deaf, and paralyzed. The fallout would be instantaneous. I could easily picture the resulting chaos unfolding down in the Wailea lobby. The polished marble floors would be crowded with exhausted tourists, arriving from long international flights expecting cold towels and immediate service. The front desk agents would be smiling apologetically as their monitors suddenly flashed black, displaying a standard error message indicating an expired software license. Panic would set in rapidly as the staff realized they could not issue room keys, process credit cards, or verify guest identities. Meanwhile, the delivery trucks carrying prime steaks and organic produce would be turning away from the loading docks. Their automated payment accounts were now frozen due to insufficient digital authentication. The local farmers who operated on strict cash flow margins would not drop off their goods without the secure digital handshake my software provided. Even the emergency maintenance hotline, which I had personally routed through my private server for overflow protection, was now an endless loop of dead air. The sprawling luxury estate was effectively transformed into a deserted island dressed up in expensive landscaping. I stood up from the wooden table and walked into the small kitchen area. I prepared a cup of Kona coffee, enjoying the rich, dark aroma filling the quiet apartment. I took my ceramic mug back to the laptop and sat down. My personal cell phone began to vibrate against the wood table. The screen lit up with automated alert messages from the resort's secondary monitoring systems. Critical system failure, network offline, payment gateway unverified. The warnings stacked on top of each other in rapid succession. Then the actual phone calls started. Jason was dialing my number. His name flashed across the glass screen, vibrating with an urgent, relentless rhythm. The arrogant conqueror was suddenly realizing his new castle had no doors, no windows, and no oxygen. The man who had laughed at my inheritance and mocked my grueling work ethic was now staring at a black computer screen, begging for a lifeline. I did not answer the call. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the hot coffee, letting the bitter, dark liquid warm my throat. I tapped the red icon on the glass screen, rejecting the incoming call. Then I navigated to his contact profile and pressed block. I did the same for Patricia. I was no longer their employee, and I was certainly no longer their safety net. Jason had demanded total independence. I had handed it to him in its most terrifying, raw form. I had removed the engine from his luxury vehicle while it was speeding down the highway. The ensuing operational panic would keep him entirely distracted for the next few days. He would be too busy fighting fires in the lobby to look over his shoulder. That chaos gave me the precise window of opportunity I required. I set my coffee mug down on the table. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the rusted key Mr. Kealoha had slid across the conference table. The oxidized brass felt heavy and rough against my palm. My father had left me a puzzle wrapped in an insult. It was time to find the lock and claim the real inheritance. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp angles of light across the bare walls of my new apartment. I sat in the silence, listening to the distant hum of city traffic. My personal phone remained quiet, secured by the digital barricades I had erected against my brother and mother. The operational fallout at the resort was no longer my problem. I had severed the cord. Just as I finished the last drops of my coffee, my secondary device vibrated against the wood table. I kept a separate dedicated phone line for communicating with external vendors and banking institutions. The caller identification displayed an unknown international number, indicating a routed, encrypted connection. I picked up the device and answered. "Miss Hernandez?" A familiar voice spoke. It was Mr. Kealoha. His tone had shifted entirely from the sterile, robotic cadence he used during the formal reading 3 days prior. He sounded urgent and highly cautious. "I am listening," I replied, keeping my response brief. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The document I read on Tuesday was authentic. Your father did indeed leave the physical estate structures and operating accounts to Jason. However, David Hernandez was a man who understood the value of deep foundations. 2 years prior to his passing, he established a revocable living trust. The stipulations of this trust were bound by a strict maturation timeline. The legal trigger occurred exactly 72 hours after the primary reading." I glanced at the rusted brass key resting on my table. The metal seemed to catch the morning light. "What does the trust entail?" I asked. Mr. Kealoha lowered his voice further. "The details are secured within Deposit Box 402. I was instructed to provide you with the key in a manner that would provoke your brother and ensure his immediate distraction. Your father anticipated Jason would be too busy celebrating his perceived victory to scrutinize the foundational land registries. Bring the key to the offshore branch of the Pacific Vault Corporation in the financial district. The answers you seek are waiting. The line clicked and disconnected. I stared at the blank screen of the phone. My father had orchestrated a deliberate theater of cruelty to test our reactions. He gave Jason the stage and the spotlight. He gave me the dirt. I grabbed my purse, slipped the key into a secure zippered pocket, and left the apartment. The drive into the downtown financial district took 20 minutes. The towering glass facades of international banks reflected the azure sky, creating a canyon of corporate wealth. I parked in a subterranean garage and took the elevator to the lobby of the Pacific Vault Corporation. The interior was a fortress of polished marble and silent security guards. I approached the front desk and presented my identification. A manager wearing a sharp, tailored suit verified my credentials against a digital ledger. He nodded silently and gestured for me to follow him. We walked through heavy steel doors into a climate-controlled vault that smelled of ozone and cold metal. Wall after wall of stainless steel deposit boxes stretched out before us. The manager stopped at a panel near the floor and inserted his master key into the left side of box 402. He stepped back, motioning for me to proceed. I retrieved the rusted brass key from my pocket. I knelt down and guided the jagged teeth into the right side lock. The mechanism was stiff, requiring a firm twist. A heavy click echoed through the silent vault. I pulled the metal drawer free and carried it to a private viewing room down the hall. The room was small, containing only a desk, a chair, and a brass reading lamp. I closed the door, locking it behind me. Inside the metal drawer sat a thick, leather-bound binder and a small, silver digital hard drive. The leather was worn soft from handling. I opened the binder and turned to the first page. It was a certificate of trust authorized by my father, bearing his unmistakable sharp signature. I began reading the dense legal paragraphs. The terminology was complex, but 10 years of managing corporate audits allowed me to translate the legalese with rapid precision. As my eyes scanned the pages, the brilliant strategy of my father revealed itself. In the state of Hawaii, real estate ownership can be divided into two separate categories. An individual can own the physical structure built on the dirt, or they can own the dirt itself. This concept is known as a leasehold estate. The trust documents outlined a quiet, systematic transfer of assets. Over the last 5 years, my father had subdivided the Hernandez Eco Resort properties. He legally separated the commercial land deeds and the exclusive zoning rights from the physical buildings erected on top of them. Jason inherited the concrete, the drywall, the swimming pools, and the lobby chandeliers. He owned the shells, but the trust designated me as the sole beneficiary of the ground beneath those shells. I inherited the commercial land deeds, the beachfront zoning rights, and the exclusive access easements. My brother was currently acting as the chief executive officer of a hospitality empire built entirely on land he did not possess. The tension in my chest unraveled, replaced by a surging wave of realization. My father had not been blind to the entitlement festering within his son. He knew Jason was a charismatic parasite. He knew Jason lacked the discipline, the intellect, and the grit required to sustain a legacy. David Hernandez had structured his inheritance as a final, brutal lesson in architecture. He gave Jason the hollow crown. He gave him the visual markers of success, the titles, the cars, and the apparent wealth, knowing the golden child would eagerly seize the superficial prize without ever looking down at his feet. He gave me the bedrock, the ugly, unpolished dirt that held everything up. I turned the page and found a drafted commercial ground lease. According to the trust stipulations, the estate was required to pay monthly lease fees to the landowner. Because my father had owned both entities while alive, those fees were simply transferred from one internal account to another. Now that the entities were divided, Jason Company owed me rent. If he failed to pay, I had the legal authority to foreclose on the structures and seize the buildings. The rusted key was not an insult. It was a weapon. Patricia had always favored aesthetics and presentation. She raised Jason to be a showpiece. My father, however, raised me to be the architect. He knew I would not crumble under the humiliation of the initial reading. He knew I would walk away quietly and wait for the true design to reveal itself. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the silver hard drive resting in the metal drawer. The power dynamic had inverted. Yesterday, I was a discarded employee scrambling to preserve my dignity. Today, I was the supreme landlord of the Hernandez empire. My initial instinct was to drive straight to the Wailea property, march into the executive suite, and slap the land deeds onto Jason's desk. I wanted to watch his arrogant smirk dissolve into panic. I wanted to see Patricia's face when she realized her golden boy was nothing more than a glorified tenant. But I suppressed that urge. A sudden confrontation would give them time to scramble, hire aggressive attorneys, and attempt to tie the trust up in prolonged litigation. My father had taught me to never strike while the enemy still had room to maneuver. Jason was currently drowning in the operational chaos I had triggered that morning. His software was dead, his vendors were angry, his guests were stranded in the lobby. He was a man fighting a devastating fire with a leaky bucket. I needed him to bleed cash. I needed his desperation to peak. I needed him to make a fatal financial mistake trying to save his sinking ship. When a parasite is starved of its host, it will inevitably consume itself. I placed the thick leather binder and the silver hard drive into my secure bag. I slid the empty metal drawer back into the vault slot and locked it. Walking out of the bank into the bright Honolulu afternoon, the humid air felt light and breathable. The narrative had changed. I was no longer running from my family. I was waiting for them to trap themselves. I returned to my sedan and placed the bag on the passenger seat. The hard drive glimmered in the sunlight, promising even more hidden truths waiting to be decrypted. I started the engine and merged into the city traffic, heading back to my quiet, sterile apartment. Jason thought he held all the cards. He did not realize I owned the table. Now it was time to plug in the silver drive and dissect the financial corpse of his new kingdom. The sterile white walls of my new apartment offered zero distractions. I sat at the small wooden dining table and placed the silver hard drive next to my laptop. The street noise from the Honolulu avenues below faded into a distant, muffled hum. I was alone in the quiet space, armed with the final financial testament of my father. I connected the drive to the USB port. A password prompt immediately appeared on the center of the glass screen. My father was a creature of rigid habit and unsentimental logic. He never used birth dates or anniversary years for his security codes. He despised emotional vulnerabilities. I typed in the latitude and longitude coordinates of his very first commercial property acquisition. The progress bar flashed green, and the encrypted vault unlocked. Dozens of neatly organized digital folders populated my desktop. I opened the master ledger file first. Tracking the flow of capital across a hospitality empire is similar to tracking water through a fractured plumbing system. You look for the damp spots, the sudden drops in pressure, and the places where the numbers do not naturally pool. Within 10 minutes of scrolling through the raw data, the grand illusion of my brother inheritance began to unravel. During the reading in the law office, Jason had smirked when the attorney listed the robust, liquid cash reserves attached to the estate. My brother believed he was stepping into a vault, overflowing with unencumbered wealth. He thought the heavy lifting was done. The spreadsheets told a vastly different story. The cash accounts were a mirage. Every single dollar of liquid capital was fiercely restricted, trapped inside mandatory debt service covenants. The estate was heavily leveraged, carrying a staggering amount of toxic, high-interest debt. I pulled up the loan origination documents, cross-referencing the dates and the project codes. The source of the financial rot became painfully clear. 3 years ago, Jason had desperately wanted to prove his visionary genius. He bypassed my oversight and convinced our mother to back a vanity project on the rugged Kona coast. He wanted to build an elite wellness retreat aimed at ultra-wealthy international tourists, featuring cliffside infinity pools and private helicopter pads. It was a logistical nightmare. He poured millions into a rocky parcel of land that lacked basic municipal utilities. The local zoning commission ultimately rejected his environmental impact reports, halting construction permanently. The project died a very public, humiliating death, but the contractors still demanded their money. The luxury architects required their exorbitant fees. To cover the disastrous losses and hide the failure from my father, Jason had sought shadow financing. He bypassed traditional lenders who would have demanded my signature as the financial controller. Instead, he secured a predatory mezzanine loan from a private equity syndicate out of Nevada. The interest rates were punishing, designed to trap desperate borrowers in a perpetual cycle of repayment. I opened the scanned PDF of the loan agreement, zooming in on the fine print. I needed to see exactly how Jason managed to secure such a large line of credit without corporate authorization. Private lenders require hard collateral. They do not hand over millions of dollars based on a charismatic smile and a famous last name. My eyes scanned the collateralization clauses. My pulse slowed to a deliberate, heavy rhythm. Jason had pledged the Wailea beachfront dirt. 6 months ago, when our father was moved into palliative care, Jason signed a sworn affidavit of asset declaration. He leveraged the commercial lands beneath our flagship eco-resort. He assumed that because he was the eldest son and the presumed heir, the dirt would eventually belong to him anyway. He treated the future inheritance as current collateral, forging the preliminary deed assurances to satisfy the greedy Nevada lenders. He committed federal bank fraud. The legal reality of his situation was breathtaking in its severity. Because the Revocable Living Trust dictated that I was the sole legal owner of the commercial land deeds Jason collateral, was entirely void. The private equity syndicate held worthless paper. They had issued a massive loan backed by dirt my brother did not own. When the lenders discovered this discrepancy, they would call the loan immediately, demanding full repayment within days. If Jason could not produce the cash, he would face ruinous civil litigation and guaranteed criminal prosecution. He did not just have a cash flow problem. He was standing on the trapdoor of a federal penitentiary. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. The sheer magnitude of his ignorance was almost difficult to comprehend. I reached for my secondary phone and opened a dummy social media profile I used for monitoring competitor marketing campaigns. I navigated to Ashley Public Feed. A live video broadcast was currently streaming from the main lawn of the Wailea property. The visual contrast between the digital ledger on my laptop and the glowing screen of my phone was jarring. Jason was throwing a lavish, catered luau to celebrate his ascension to Chief Executive Officer. The pristine, manicured grass was covered with elegant white tents and tiki torches blazing against the twilight sky. A traditional roasting pit smoldered in the background, while Polynesian fire dancers twirled flaming batons for a crowd of cheering, affluent guests. Ashley stood in the foreground of the video, wearing a designer silk dress, holding a crystal flute of imported champagne. She smiled brightly for the camera, her cubic zirconia jewelry catching the light. She panned the phone to capture Jason, holding a microphone on a small wooden stage. My brother looked incredibly handsome in a custom-tailored linen shirt. He raised his glass to the cheering crowd, offering a charming, self-deprecating toast about the heavy burdens of leadership. He soaked in the applause, basking in the adoration of his wealthy peers. I watched the live stream with a cold, detached fascination. The people dancing under the string lights were drinking liquor paid for by a desperate shadow loan. The pristine grass they stood upon belonged legally and exclusively to the sister they had just evicted. Jason was eating roasted pork and sipping rare vintages, entirely unaware that he was celebrating on a sinking ship. He thought he was the king of the island. He was actually a trespasser, hosting a party inside his own financial prison. I tapped the screen, ending the video broadcast. The silence of my apartment returned, serving as a sharp reminder of the work still required. The trap was set perfectly, but I needed to understand every single gear in the mechanism before I pulled the lever. I turned my attention back to the laptop screen. While the toxic Nevada loan explained the crippling debt burden from 3 years ago, it did not account for the recent bleeding in our operational accounts. During my final months as controller, I noticed unexplained deficits in the routine maintenance budgets. Small, precise cuts that bled the quarterlies dry. The silver drive contained one final encrypted folder. It was labeled with a generic alphanumeric string, but its file size was substantial. I clicked the icon, initiating the decryption sequence. The mezzanine loan was the blunder of an arrogant fool. But the missing operational cash felt different. It felt calculated. It felt like deliberate theft. I rested my fingers on the keyboard, watching the progress bar inch toward completion. I prepared to dig deeper into the financial corpse of my family legacy, ready to find exactly where the rest of the poison was hiding. The progress bar on the decryption software hit 100%. A soft, pleasant chime echoed in the quiet room. The alphanumeric folder unlocked, revealing a labyrinth of financial documents. I opened the first subfolder labeled Vendor Disbursement Records. The glare of the monitor cast long, pale shadows across my empty dining table. I leaned closer to the glass screen, adjusting my posture as the sheer volume of data loaded into the spreadsheet application. Over the past 2 years, I had battled a constant, inexplicable drain on our preventative maintenance accounts. The capital allocated for essential repairs always vanished right before critical upgrades were scheduled. Roof restorations on the guest cabanas were repeatedly delayed. Air conditioning units in the luxury oceanfront villas failed prematurely because routine servicing was perpetually underfunded. Jason always blamed macroeconomic factors, citing inflation, supply chain disruptions, and rising local labor costs. I clicked on a master ledger detailing quarterly expenditures to external contractors. A recurring vendor name caught my eye, appearing multiple times each month. Aura Lifestyle Solutions. According to the ledger, they were billing the Hernandez estate $40,000 every 4 weeks for brand synergy consulting and elite guest experience optimization. The descriptions were vague, packed with corporate buzzwords that signified nothing of actual value. I cross-referenced the corporate tax identification number linked to those invoices with the Hawaii State Business Registry. The database query returned a result in less than 3 seconds. The registered agent and sole proprietor for Aura Lifestyle Solutions was Ashley. It was not a legitimate marketing agency. It was a phantom corporation consisting of a post office box in a strip mall and a routing number. Jason was siphoning essential operating funds to finance his wife designer wardrobe and luxury European vacations. He was deliberately starving the physical infrastructure of our properties to buy shiny objects. Every time a guest complained about a leaking ceiling or a broken shower valve, the money meant to fix those issues was already sitting in Ashley's private checking account. Embezzlement committed by an arrogant, entitled brother was disappointing, but entirely predictable. He lacked the discipline to build wealth, so he chose to steal it from the family well. I highlighted the routing numbers tracing the flow of stolen capital through the corporate banking portal. To process external vendor payments of that magnitude, the internal accounting software required dual executive authorization. As the financial controller, I audited those portals daily. I had never seen these specific invoices. They were purposefully routed around my desk through a blind digital corridor, bypassing the standard security protocols I had established. I opened the appended digital approval logs. I expected to find forged credentials. I anticipated seeing Jason using a dummy administrative account or perhaps bribing a junior clerk to push the approvals through the system. Instead, I found a chain of internal emails exported and saved as PDF files. The sender was Jason. The recipient was our mother. "Hey, Mom," the first message read. "Aura needs the monthly draw cleared today. Ash booked the Paris trip and the deposit is due by 5. Let Taylor keep spinning her wheels balancing the utility budgets. Just push this through the priority queue." I scrolled down to read the reply. The timestamp indicated it was sent late on a Tuesday evening in November. My memory of that specific night remained razor sharp. That was the exact same evening I had spent 6 hours on a conference call with our mainland plumbing contractors, begging them for a temporary extension on a past due invoice so we could keep the water running at the North Shore property. I had skipped dinner. I had skipped sleep. My hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too much stress. Patricia responded to his email with 3 simple words. Approved. Delete this. I stared at the digital signature validating the theft. Patricia's signature, my mother. The woman who watched me sacrifice my 20s to keep the family solvent. The woman who sat immaculate and composed in the law office scolding me for being ungrateful. The woman who stood in the doorway of my bungalow instructing me not to be difficult when Jason handed me a fake eviction notice. She knew. She knew Jason was bleeding the company dry, and she actively facilitated the crime. She watched me suffer through anxiety attacks, worrying about how to make payroll for our housekeeping staff, while she quietly diverted our cash to fund her golden boy lavish excursions. She prioritized a fabricated image of success over my actual health and sanity. She enabled his greed and used my diligence to cover their tracks. The betrayal did not manifest as a burning, blinding rage. It did not make me want to scream or throw my laptop against the sterile white wall. The realization descended like a sudden, profound winter freeze. The lingering warmth of familial obligation vanished. The foolish, subconscious hope that my mother might eventually recognize my worth simply died. The emotional tether snapped, leaving a clean, sharp break. I looked at a mental photograph of Patricia sitting in the conference room, her pearls resting against her collarbone, her eyes devoid of maternal affection. She was not a passive victim of Jason manipulation. She was his willing co-conspirator. She sacrificed the daughter to build a throne for the son. I closed the email thread. The mourning period for a family I never truly had was officially over. I was no longer a discarded sister seeking validation. I was an architect staring at the blueprints of a condemned building. The pain of her betrayal hardened into pure, unadulterated ice. I opened a new secure browser window and accessed the Hawaii Bureau of Conveyance's online portal. As the legal beneficiary of the Revocable Living Trust, I held the exclusive commercial land deeds for the entire Hernandez footprint. The concrete structures erected upon that dirt were currently owned by Jason. However, because his buildings were drawing resources and occupying space on my sovereign property without a negotiated commercial lease, I possessed immediate statutory rights. I navigated to the encumbrance filing section. I drafted a quiet title lien against the physical structures of the Wailea Beachfront Resort. A quiet lien does not trigger an immediate public notification. It does not send a warning letter to the target. It sits invisibly in the county registry, waiting for a specific triggering event. If Jason attempted to sell the resort to cover his toxic mezzanine loan, the title search would flag the lien, blocking the transaction instantly. If he tried to secure a secondary line of credit to fix the operational chaos, the bank would discover the encumbrance and deny the application. By filing this document, I pinned his hollow empire to the floor. He could not sell. He could not borrow. He could only sink. I paid the state filing fee using my secure external credit line. The portal refreshed, generating a digital receipt bearing the official county seal. The Wailea properties were now legally paralyzed. I closed the laptop, sliding it away from the edge of the table. The apartment was entirely dark now, the sun having slipped below the Pacific horizon. I sat in the darkness, feeling an immense sense of clarity. The pieces were perfectly positioned on the board. Jason held the hollow title. Patricia held the enabling lies. I held the bedrock, the toxic debt and the irrefutable proof of their federal crimes. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I was a corporate predator waiting in the tall grass, watching the prey wander directly into the trap. My phone screen lit up, illuminating the wooden table behind me. The operational chaos I triggered that morning was about to reach its critical tipping point. The local vendors who kept the island hospitality engine running were waking up to frozen accounts and bounced checks. The farmers, the laundry services, the maintenance crews, they all relied on the automated payments I had severed. Tomorrow morning, the illusion of Jason leadership would shatter, right in the middle of his pristine marble lobby. The creditors were coming, and the golden boy had empty pockets. The morning light filtered through the thin blinds of my living room, casting pale stripes across the bare floorboards. I sat at the wooden dining table, holding a fresh cup of green tea. The city below was waking up to another beautiful tropical dawn, but my attention remained fixed on the glowing screen of my secondary phone. I opened a popular social media application and typed the Wailea property location tag into the search bar. The digital algorithm did not disappoint. The resort was already trending across the island. The Hawaiian hospitality ecosystem operates on a currency far more valuable than standard corporate credit. It runs on a deeply ingrained network of personal trust and mutual respect. The local farmers, the independent maintenance crews, and the specialized caterers do not sign contracts with faceless mainland conglomerates. They do business with individuals who look them in the eye and shake their hands. For 10 years, I was the person sitting at their kitchen tables, guaranteeing their invoices would clear every Friday morning. When my proprietary software went dark the previous afternoon, it severed the automated clearinghouse gateways. The scheduled weekly disbursements failed to process. To a massive global supplier, a delayed payment is a minor clerical annoyance. To an independent island farmer operating on razor-thin margins, a bounced transfer is a direct threat to their survival. The first video on the search feed was a live broadcast initiated by a stranded tourist standing near the concierge desk. I tapped the screen to expand the view. The pristine white marble lobby of the Wailea estate was swarming with angry locals. I recognized the man leading the crowd immediately. Makana ran the most prominent organic hydroponic farm on Oahu. He supplied all the heirloom produce for our fine dining restaurants. He was a towering figure with broad shoulders, wearing faded denim and heavy work boots that tracked red volcanic dirt across the polished stone floor. Standing right behind him were the luau caterers who had provided the roasted pork and the fire dancers for Jason's lavish inheritance party the night before. None of them had received their money. The camera panned to reveal Jason marching down the grand, sweeping staircase. My brother looked disheveled. The custom-tailored linen shirt he wore during his victory toast was wrinkled and untucked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, revealing the toll of a sleepless night spent fighting a paralyzed computer network. He marched toward the crowd, attempting to project an aura of executive authority. "You need to clear this area," Jason demanded, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "You are disrupting the guest experience." Makana did not flinch. He stepped forward, holding a thick stack of printed invoices. The paper trembled slightly in his large hands. "You owe my farm $40,000, Jason. The caterers are owed another $20,000. The digital transfers bounced at midnight. We are not leaving this building until the accounts are settled." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered workers. Several wealthy tourists wearing expensive resort wear stopped dragging their luggage and pulled out their own phones to record the confrontation. The immaculate illusion of the Hernandez brand was cracking under the harsh fluorescent lights of the reception area. Before Jason could formulate a coherent response, Ashley pushed her way through the crowd. My sister-in-law wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors and a silk robe tied tightly at her waist. She held her latest smartphone like a shield, prepared to manage the crisis with the only tool she understood. "Listen to me," Ashley announced, raising a manicured hand to quiet the room. "We are experiencing a minor technical glitch with the banking servers, but I have a mutually beneficial solution for everyone. I have over 200,000 followers on my lifestyle page. If you leave right now and drop off the fresh produce for the kitchens, I will personally tag your farm in my next 3 outfit posts. The brand synergy will bring you incredible exposure." The lobby fell into a heavy, stunned silence. The sheer tone deafness of the proposal hung in the air like foul smoke. Makana stared at her, his expression hardening from frustration into pure disgust. "Exposure does not buy tractor fuel, lady. Exposure does not feed the men standing behind me. We do not want your internet tags. We want the cash we earned." The rejection landed hard. Ashley flushed a deep shade of crimson, stepping backward behind her husband. She had tried to pacify a group of hard-working tradesmen with the empty currency of superficial fame, and it had backfired spectacularly. The tourists watching the scene began to whisper among themselves, pointing at the stranded executive couple. Jason panicked. The public humiliation was eroding his fragile ego. He needed to reassert dominance and prove he was the king of the island. He reached into his leather wallet and extracted the heavy black corporate credit card. He turned to the terrified front desk manager hovering near the silent computer terminals. "Run a manual override," Jason ordered, thrusting the dark plastic card across the counter. "Charge the total balance for these vendors and cut them a cashier check from the lobby safe. Do it right now." The manager nodded frantically. He typed the credit card numbers into the battery-powered backup terminal. He pressed the authorization key. I took a slow sip of my green tea, watching the live feed with intense satisfaction. I knew exactly what was about to happen. The backup terminal blinked a stark, angry red. A loud electronic beep signaled the rejection. The manager swallowed hard, staring at the small screen. "Declined," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the restless crowd. "Run it again!" Jason yelled, the veins in his neck bulging against his skin. The manager swiped the magnetic strip. The machine emitted the same harsh warning tone. The corporate card was entirely useless. Jason grabbed the emergency landline from the desk and dialed the private liaison number for our commercial bank. He put the receiver to his ear, pacing a tight circle behind the counter. He demanded answers, screaming at whoever answered the call on the other end. Sitting in my apartment, I did not need to hear the banker response to know the precise mechanics of the trap. The mezzanine loan Jason had secretly secured 3 years ago contained unforgiving operational covenants. The private equity syndicate required a daily sweep of our revenue deposits to ensure the debt service remained current. When I unplugged the proprietary booking software, the reservations halted. The daily revenue dropped to zero. The automated banking algorithm detected the sudden disruption in cash flow. Sensing a critical default risk, the bank triggered an emergency protective protocol. They placed a hard freeze on every single liquid asset connected to the Hernandez estate. They locked the checking accounts. They froze the corporate credit lines. They sealed the lobby safes. Jason stood behind the marble counter, the color draining rapidly from his face. The phone slipped from his grip, clattering against the desk. The brutal reality of his situation crushed the remaining breath from his lungs. He held the prestigious title of Chief Executive Officer. He occupied the corner office, yet he lacked the purchasing power to buy a single cup of coffee. He was a figurehead presiding over a paralyzed empire. Makana watched the display of financial impotence with narrowed eyes. He turned to his crew and gave a sharp nod. "Pack the trucks," the large farmer instructed. "Do not leave a single crate of fruit or a single pound of meat on this property." The vendors turned around and marched out the sliding glass doors, taking their essential supplies with them. The luxury restaurants would not open for dinner. The poolside bars would have no fresh garnishes. The illusion of effortless island hospitality was shattered. The stranded tourists immediately swarmed the desk, demanding refunds and alternative accommodations. Jason backed away from the counter, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. He could not process their refunds because the systems were dead. He could not offer them free meals because the kitchens were empty. He retreated toward the executive elevators, leaving the frightened staff to face the angry mob. I tapped the screen, closing the social media application. The broadcast ended, leaving my apartment in profound quiet. A moment later, my primary phone lit up on the table. The screen displayed the blocked call log. The notifications rolled in with frantic speed. Jason was dialing my number over and over again. He left rapid, disjointed voicemails, pleading for me to answer. He demanded the software codes. He begged me to call the bank and authorize a release of the funds. The man who had mocked my 10 years of labor was now desperately clawing at the walls of his financial prison. He finally realized he could not bully a financial institution or a local supplier the way he had bullied his sister. He realized his inherited crown was made of worthless paper. I picked up the phone and silenced the notifications. The vendor collapse was merely the opening act. Jason was desperate for a lifeline, but he would find no mercy here. He would undoubtedly attempt to save his public image at the upcoming charity gala, relying on his charismatic charm to secure emergency funding. I set my empty teacup in the sink, preparing my wardrobe for the evening. The island elite needed to see the emperor without his clothes, and I intended to deliver the final thread pulling the entire fabric apart. The annual Pacific Horizons Charity Gala was the undisputed pinnacle of the Honolulu High Society calendar. Held in the grand ballroom of a historic Waikiki hotel, the event gathered the most affluent real estate developers, politicians, and hospitality executives on the island. The men wore tailored tuxedos, while the women draped themselves in silk and rare gems. I stood near a towering arrangement of white orchids holding a glass of sparkling water. I wore a sleek navy evening gown devoid of flashy embellishments. I was not there to flaunt wealth. I attended as an invited VIP guest of a prominent commercial consulting firm, eager to introduce me to their network now that my professional calendar was officially open. The orchestral string quartet played a soft classical arrangement, masking the quiet hum of million-dollar deals being negotiated over crystal champagne flutes. I navigated the room with ease, greeting vendors I had paid on time for 10 years and shaking hands with bankers who respected my fiscal discipline. The atmosphere was refined and perfectly controlled. Then the heavy brass doors of the ballroom swung open. Jason, Ashley, and Patricia entered the venue. They had not RSVP'd. They were crashing the event, desperate to maintain their societal footing amidst the catastrophic operational failure unfolding at their own resort. My brother wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that looked a fraction too tight across his shoulders. His smile was rigid, failing to reach his eyes. Ashley clung to his arm, wearing a plunging emerald gown and an ostentatious diamond necklace that caught the light from every chandelier in the room. Patricia flanked them, scanning the crowd with sharp, calculating eyes, ensuring the island elite saw the Hernandez family standing tall, despite the swirling rumors of frozen bank accounts and unpaid farmers. I remained near the orchids, watching them work the room. They were a trio of actors performing a desperate play. Jason targeted a circle of wealthy mainland investors standing near the ice sculpture. I stepped closer, blending into the shadows of a nearby pillar, allowing the ambient noise to camouflage my presence. I wanted to hear exactly how my brother was spinning his disastrous morning. The dramatic irony hovering over the conversation was thick enough to cut with a knife. "It is a minor infrastructure transition," Jason boasted, swirling his bourbon glass. "We are merely upgrading our software protocols to elevate the guest experience. The vendor delays are just a temporary symptom of progress. In fact, I am already finalizing a strategic partnership to restructure the overarching debt portfolio." An older investor raised an eyebrow, expressing mild skepticism. "Restructuring so soon after taking the helm, Jason? The word on the street is your primary lender froze your operating capital today." Jason let out a forced, practiced chuckle. "Street rumors are for amateurs, Tom. I have a brilliant private equity firm waiting in the wings. A boutique syndicate. They are preparing to buy out the mezzanine debt and infuse the estate with fresh capital. I am playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers." I took a slow sip of my water. Jason was loudly bragging to the most influential men in Hawaii about a mysterious private equity savior. He had no idea the firm he was boasting about was the sister he evicted just 24 hours prior. He was a pawn, bragging to the king about a board he could not even see. Before Jason could continue his fabricated narrative, Patricia spotted me standing near the pillar. Her posture stiffened. She tapped Ashley on the shoulder and pointed a manicured finger in my direction. The two women excused themselves from the circle of investors and marched toward me, their expressions hardening into masks of pure hostility. Patricia grabbed my elbow, her grip tight and bruising. She pulled me away from the center of the room toward a quiet alcove near the velvet curtains. Ashley followed close behind her, glittering necklace throwing fractured light across the patterned carpet. "What are you doing here, Taylor?" Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You are embarrassing this family." "The scene in the Wailea lobby this morning was a disgrace. You engineered that humiliation on purpose." I pulled my arm free from her grasp, smoothing the fabric of my gown. "I engineered nothing, Mom. I simply vacated the premises as instructed." Ashley stepped forward, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "Stop playing games, Taylor. You locked the vendor systems. You froze the reservations. Jason has been on the phone with the IT department all afternoon, and they cannot bypass your stupid firewall. Give us the administrative passwords right now, or we're calling the police for corporate sabotage." I looked at my sister-in-law, absorbing her profound ignorance. The music swelled from the center of the ballroom, providing a stark contrast to the venom spewing from her lips. Several guests standing nearby turned their heads, drawn by the harsh tone of Ashley's voice. "You cannot claim sabotage when you legally surrendered the asset," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level and calm. Jason handed me a severance release, demanding I sign it. That specific document contained a clause relinquishing all corporate claims to my independent intellectual property. "I did not break into your servers, Ashley. I simply unplugged my own legally protected property and took it with me. If Jason wanted to use my software, he should have read the contract before forcing my signature." Patricia's face paled. She recognized the chilling finality of my statement. The realization that her golden boy had legally authorized his own operational destruction hit her with staggering force. Ashley, however, lacked the intellectual capacity to grasp the legal nuance. She crossed her arms, her emerald gown rustling. You are pathetic, Taylor. You are just jealous because Jason inherited the empire and you got nothing. Look at you standing here in a cheap dress, trying to rub shoulders with our friends. You will never belong in this circle. You do not have the wealth, the status, or the class. The volume of her insult carried across the alcove. The circle of investors Jason had been speaking to paused their conversation, turning to observe the escalating drama. Jason noticed the shifting attention and hurried over, his velvet jacket straining as he rushed to intervene. "Keep your voice down, Ash," Jason whispered, grabbing his wife's arm. He glared at me, his eyes wide with panic. "Just leave Taylor. You have done enough damage for one day." I did not move. I looked at the three of them standing together, united by their greed and their shared delusion. They had pushed me into the shadows for a decade. They had stolen from the maintenance funds, lied to the banks, and attempted to strip me of my dignity. Now they stood in front of the island's most powerful citizens, pretending to be royalty. It was time to shatter the glass. I stepped closer to Ashley, closing the physical distance between us. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, carrying resonance that forced everyone nearby to lean in and listen. "Wealth is a fascinating concept, Ashley," I stated, my eyes locking onto the glittering stones resting against her collarbone. "Some people build it through decades of sacrifice. Others try to fake it by renting cubic zirconia from the high-end boutique on Kalakaua Avenue." Ashley froze. The haughty expression melted off her face, replaced by genuine terror. I reached out and pointed a single finger at the heavy silver clasp resting near her neck. "I audited the ledger for that specific boutique every quarter to secure our corporate gifting discounts," I continued. "I know their inventory by heart. That piece is a seasonal replica. The rental serial number is engraved on the underside of the clasp. Item code 74 Bravo. If you do not return it by noon tomorrow, they will charge your credit card a $300 late fee, which might be difficult considering the bank froze your accounts this morning." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. The silence that followed was deafening. The orchestral music seemed to fade into the background. Every eye in the alcove locked onto Ashley's neck. The color drained entirely from Ashley's face. She reached up instinctively, covering the fake necklace with a trembling hand, turning a deep shade of crimson. Her fabricated image dissolved instantly under the harsh spotlight of undeniable truth. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was a fraud, wearing rented plastic financed by stolen money. Jason stood, paralyzed. His jaw went slack. The elite investors he had just been boasting to were now staring at him with open disgust. The facade of the brilliant executive orchestrating a master financial transition was dead. He was exposed as an incompetent, desperate man, putting on a cheap theatrical production. Patricia lowered her head, staring at the patterned carpet, unable to look any of her wealthy peers in the eye. The social standing she had sacrificed her daughter to protect evaporated into thin air. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply turned my back on the wreckage of their dignity. I walked through the parted crowd, my head held high, leaving them to face the quiet, devastating judgment of the Honolulu elite. The charity gala ambush was a localized social execution, but the true financial guillotine was waiting for Jason in the morning. When the sun rose, the bank would complete their audit of his fraudulent collateral, plunging his fake empire into an inescapable legal nightmare. The morning sun baked the Honolulu pavement, erasing the lingering chill of the previous night. Deep inside the towering glass structures of the financial district, a specialized team of senior risk analysts gathered around a polished boardroom table. They spent the early daylight hours tearing apart the Hernandez corporate portfolio, searching for the root cause of the sudden revenue freeze. A junior underwriter ran a routine query through the county land registry and discovered the quiet title encumbrance I had filed the day prior. The sterile room erupted into organized panic. The seasoned bankers realized the massive mezzanine loan was secured by dirt the borrower did not legally possess. The collateral was completely fictitious. Federal regulations mandate immediate, aggressive action when fraudulent applications are detected within commercial lending institutions. The executives drafted a formal document, printed it on heavy bond paper, and dispatched a priority courier to the Wailea coast. A certified messenger navigated the chaotic resort driveway, dodging stranded tourists and abandoned luggage carts. He marched past the dysfunctional reception desk and demanded an ink signature from the chief executive officer. Jason tore open the thick manila envelope inside his corner office. The official notice of default carried the devastating weight of a physical blow. The bold black letters outlined the brutal mathematics of his demise. He was given exactly 72 hours to produce $4 million in liquid funds. Failure to remit the full balance would trigger immediate asset seizure and a direct referral to the authorities for criminal wire fraud. The psychological unraveling commenced instantly. Jason collapsed into his leather chair, his hands trembling uncontrollably. His breathing grew shallow and erratic as the invisible walls of his unearned empire closed in around his throat. Desperation completely overrode his usual arrogance. He picked up his mobile device and began scrolling frantically through his elite contact list. He targeted the strategic military defense contractors stationed at the nearby naval bases. For years, Jason had treated those high-ranking commanders to lavish golf excursions and imported cigars, hoping to secure lucrative, long-term hospitality contracts. He relied on the illusion of vast generational wealth to manufacture influence among the military elite. Now, he desperately needed a massive favor. He called a prominent logistics director, begging for an emergency short-term capital injection to bridge the financial gap. The line rang 6 times before transferring to an automated greeting. He dialed another prominent developer, then a local politician. Every single attempt met the exact same silent fate. The island's social network operates with a ruthless, terrifying efficiency. The humiliating charity gala ambush was already the primary topic of conversation among the Hawaiian upper echelon. Word of the rented cubic zirconia and the paralyzed banking portals had spread like a rampant wildfire. Jason was officially categorized as a toxic asset. Nobody wanted to catch his sinking disease or associate their pristine reputations with a man facing an imminent federal indictment. Seeking comfort, he abandoned the corner office and took the private elevator up to the residential penthouse suite. He expected to find his wife formulating a clever public relations strategy or leveraging her digital followers for support. Instead, he opened the heavy mahogany door to a scene of frantic destruction. Ashley was hurling designer garments into a set of luxury leather suitcases. The emerald gown from the previous evening lay discarded on the floor, resembling a crumpled green rag. She moved with a manic, terrified energy, yanking silk blouses from wooden hangers and tossing them carelessly into the luggage compartments. "What are you doing?" Jason asked, his voice cracking under the immense strain. Ashley did not pause her frantic packing. "The bank froze my personal checking account," she snapped, aggressively zipping a massive travel bag shut. "The boutique tried to charge my card for the necklace late fee, and the payment bounced. My phone has been ringing all morning. I am ruined in this town, Jason. The other influencers are posting videos laughing at me. You told me you owned this entire island. You promised me we were untouchable royalty." Jason reached out, trying to grab her slender wrist. "We can fix this, Ash," he pleaded. "I just need a few days to restructure the debt. I will find a bridge loan." Ashley yanked her arm away. her perfectly contoured face twisting into a mask of pure contempt. "There is no restructuring a broke fraud," she spat, grabbing her heavy bags and marching toward the exit. "You do not have a bridge loan. You do not have anything, and I refuse to sink with a captain who cannot even keep the lights on." The heavy door slammed shut, severing the fragile, superficial bond of their marriage. She dropped the supportive partner facade the exact moment the money vanished, revealing the parasitic reality of her affection. Jason wandered back down to the main lobby, entirely alone. The grand space was evolving into a stifling sauna. Without the automated software systems managing the climate control, the industrial air conditioning units had tripped their safety breakers hours ago. The thick, tropical heat permeated the marble walls. Melting ice from abandoned cocktail stations formed sticky puddles on the polished floor. Scent of sour fruit and sweat hung heavy in the stagnant air. Exhausted staff members had walked off their shifts, unwilling to endure the abuse of angry guests for empty promises of future paychecks. The physical rot of the estate perfectly mirrored the internal collapse of its so-called visionary leader. Pacing across the sticky floor, Jason felt his mind fracture further. Unable to accept responsibility for his catastrophic blunders, he projected his failures onto the only target available. He convinced himself this catastrophe was entirely my fault. If I had simply signed the termination paperwork and vanished quietly into the shadows, he would be fine. His twisted logic formulated a final delusional plan. I had lived incredibly frugally for a decade. I never drove imported cars or took lavish European vacations. I wore practical clothing and packed my own lunches while managing his bloated expense accounts. He deduced I must possess a significant stockpile of personal savings hidden away in some obscure credit union. He believed he could intimidate me into handing over my private bank accounts to satisfy his predatory lenders and save his skin. But he also recognized he needed a broader corporate shield to legitimize the transaction. He suddenly remembered the anonymous inquiry his secretary received a few days prior. A mysterious private equity buyer had expressed strong interest in acquiring a minority stake in the Hernandez portfolio to inject fresh operating capital. Jason clung to this phantom savior like a drowning man grasping a jagged rock in a turbulent ocean. He pulled out his phone and drafted an urgent mass message to the remaining executive board members and his retained legal counsel. He scheduled an emergency summit for the following morning in the primary conference room. He firmly believed he would walk into that meeting, extract my personal wealth through aggressive intimidation, and sign a lucrative partnership deal with a faceless billionaire. He sent the digital summons, expecting the world to bend to his will one last time. The stage was meticulously set for the ultimate execution. But the condemned man still thought he was the one directing the play. While Jason paced the sweltering lobby of his decaying resort, I sat in the hyper-air-conditioned office of the largest commercial underwriter in Honolulu. The environment provided a stark contrast to my previous decade of windowless back rooms. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Diamond Head crater. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer sitting across from a senior loan officer named David. David did not care about social media followers or charity gala gossip. He cared about tangible assets, ironclad collateral, and risk mitigation. I slid the thick leather binder containing the revocable living trust and the commercial land deeds across his polished glass desk. My brother believed wealth was a flashy sports car or a luxury suit. True wealth is dirt. It is the limited volcanic soil that anchors multi-million-dollar structures. David reviewed the documents in silence. His eyes scanned the certified county seals and the irrefutable proof of sole ownership. I owned the bedrock beneath the Wailea beachfront. I held the exclusive zoning rights for the North Shore retreats. The appraisal value of that unencumbered land was staggering. I did not ask for a small personal loan. I requested a premier corporate credit facility leveraging the dirt as my guarantor. Within 2 hours, David presented a digital contract. I signed the tablet authorizing a revolving credit line large enough to purchase a small island. I was no longer a discarded employee seeking a paycheck. I was a heavily capitalized entity. The next step required surgical precision. I needed to acquire the toxic mezzanine debt Jason had secured 3 years prior. The private equity syndicate out of Nevada was currently in a state of unmitigated panic. They had issued a highly irregular loan based on fraudulent collateral. When my quiet title lien hit the county registry, their risk management department realized their terrible mistake. They held a distressed note backed by a resort building that sat on sovereign land owned by a hostile third party. Without the dirt, the building was essentially worthless. The syndicate was facing a total write-off and potential regulatory scrutiny for failing to perform basic due diligence. I did not call them using my personal phone. I routed the communication through my independent holding company, Coral Logic. I utilized a secure video conference link sitting straight-backed at my bare dining table. The screen split into 3 grids, displaying stressed equity partners sitting in a sterile Las Vegas boardroom. Their expensive tailored suits could not hide their palpable anxiety. They assumed they were speaking to a mainland investment firm looking to scavenge distressed Hawaiian assets. "You are holding a toxic tranche," I stated, keeping my tone flat and devoid of emotion. The borrower triggered a severe default covenant this morning. The primary collateral is compromised by a superior title claim. You are facing a total loss on the principal. I am prepared to offer a clean exit. The lead partner leaned into his microphone, attempting to project a position of strength. "The property still generates revenue," he countered. "We can initiate receivership, seize the physical structures, and liquidate the resort assets to recover our exposure." I pulled up the specific legal statutes on my secondary monitor, reading them verbatim. You cannot liquidate structures occupying leased land without the explicit consent of the landowner. The landowner has filed a quiet title encumbrance. You are gridlocked. If you attempt foreclosure, the litigation will stretch for 5 years and bleed your legal department dry. Furthermore, your firm will be audited for issuing an unsecured loan based on forged declarations. The debt-to-equity ratio was fabricated. The borrower committed federal wire fraud. If you maintain ownership of this paper, you become entangled in the upcoming criminal indictment. Silence hung over the digital connection. They knew I held the superior position. They were trapped in a burning room, and I was selling the only exit door. I offered to purchase the entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. It was a mere fraction of the original principal, but it provided them with immediate liquidity and a chance to sweep their catastrophic underwriting failure under the rug before the federal regulators arrived. The partners muted their microphones to confer. The video feed showed them arguing, gesturing frantically, pointing at printed spreadsheets spread across their conference table. I watched them sweat. I watched them realize they had been outplayed by a localized variable they failed to account for during their initial greedy assessment. 2 minutes later, the audio reconnected. The lead partner looked utterly defeated. "We accept your terms," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Send the transfer protocols and the non-disclosure agreements." The speed of modern finance is a terrifying and beautiful phenomenon. I initiated the electronic wire transfer, utilizing my newly secured corporate credit line. The digital routing numbers synchronized. Millions of dollars shifted across the Pacific Ocean in a matter of seconds. The Nevada syndicate officially relinquished their claim to the mezzanine note. They assigned all rights, privileges, and collection authorities to Coral Logic. The video call disconnected, leaving my apartment in profound silence. I leaned back in my wooden chair, staring at the glass screen. The strategic implications of the transaction were profound. For years, I had played the role of the dutiful sister, begging for basic operational funds to keep the family business afloat. I had pleaded with my brother to stop draining the accounts for his vanity projects. I had endured the condescension and the disrespect, hoping my quiet diligence would eventually earn a seat at the table. I was done begging. I was done waiting for a seat. I had just bought the entire table. By acquiring the debt, I fundamentally altered the power dynamic. I was no longer an heir fighting for a fraction of an inheritance. I was the primary creditor. Jason owed me the money. He owed me the principal, the compounding interest, and the severe penalty fees associated with his immediate default. He thought he was preparing for a crucial board meeting the next morning to impress a mysterious private equity firm. He thought a faceless billionaire was flying across the ocean to infuse his sinking empire with cash and save his reputation. He was right about the private equity firm. He was just painfully wrong about the identity of the savior. My laptop emitted a soft chime. An email from the International Clearinghouse arrived in my secure inbox. I opened the message. The attached document was a digital transfer confirmation bearing the official encrypted seals of both banking institutions. The toxic debt was officially registered under my holding company. I downloaded the file and saved it to the silver hard drive. The trap was fully primed. Every single piece of the intricate mechanism had locked into place. I had the land deeds securing the bedrock. I had the canceled vendor contracts paralyzing the daily operations. I had the embezzlement records proving the fraud. And now, I held the financial chains binding his entire future. I closed the laptop and walked over to the closet. I needed to select the perfect outfit for the emergency board meeting. Something sharp, tailored, and entirely unapproachable. The mourning period was a distant memory. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into the executive suite not as a discarded sister, but as the undisputed executioner. The executive boardroom occupied the highest floor of the Wailea property. The architectural design was intended to project unyielding corporate dominance. Floor-to-ceiling glass panes offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. The walls were paneled in rich, dark mahogany sourced from sustainable island reserves. Under normal circumstances, the climate control systems kept the room at a crisp, comfortable temperature, allowing the board members to wear heavy wool suits while gazing out at the tropical paradise below. Today, the room was a stifling greenhouse. Without my proprietary software managing the energy grids, the industrial air conditioning units remained dormant. The midday Hawaiian sun battered the glass, turning the enclosed space into an oven. Jason stood near the edge of the conference table, wiping his forehead with a damp linen handkerchief. He wore a bespoke Italian suit, tailored to flatter his athletic build. That expensive garment was now a trap. The silk lining clung to his sweating skin. His pristine white dress shirt was translucent across his shoulders, stained with the physical manifestation of his profound anxiety. He poured a glass of lukewarm water from a crystal carafe, his hands shaking enough to rattle the glass against the table. Patricia paced the length of the room. Her expensive heels sank deep into the plush carpet, leaving temporary indentations with every restless step. She muttered under her breath, rehearsing the upcoming negotiation. Her immaculate appearance was fracturing under the heat and the stress. A single bead of sweat ruined the perfect foundation on her cheek. Her knuckles were white, gripping the handles of her designer handbag with desperate force. "You must project strength, Jason," she instructed, stopping her frantic pacing to look at her son. "When the representatives from the private equity firm arrive, you must command the room. Do not let them sense your desperation. We are offering them a rare opportunity to partner with an established island dynasty. They need us just as much as we need their capital." Jason nodded, swallowing hard. He loosened his silk tie, pulling the knot down an inch to let his neck breathe. "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice lacking its usual resonant confidence. I have the pitch memorized. I will offer them a 49% equity stake. They absorb the mezzanine debt and provide a bridge loan to unfreeze our operating accounts. In exchange, they get a share of our quarterly profits. He leaned against the heavy wooden table, trying to convince himself the fabricated narrative was real. I retain the title of Chief Executive Officer, he continued. I keep 51%. We maintain majority voting rights. The Nevada Syndicate only dropped our debt because they were terrified of the complex local zoning laws. This new firm is mainland-based. They just want a passive investment vehicle. I can handle them. Patricia offered a tight, approving smile. It was the same smile she used to validate his delusions for the past 3 decades. When Jason failed his university finance courses, Patricia hired expensive private tutors to log into his student portals and complete his online examinations. When a 19-year-old Jason crashed a leased sports car into a retaining wall after a long night in Waikiki, Patricia arrived before the police, paying the dealership owner a staggering sum of cash to bury the incident. She spent her entire life shielding her golden boy from the sting of consequence. She raised a man who believed the universe would always provide a safety net. She firmly believed today would be no different. She expected another expensive tutor or another quiet cash settlement to materialize and wipe the slate clean. They checked their luxury watches in unison. The emergency meeting was scheduled to begin in 2 minutes. They stood in the sweltering silence, waiting for their wealthy savior to walk through the doors and validate their unearned entitlement. I stepped out of the stairwell onto the executive floor. I bypassed the elevators, knowing the backup generators were prioritizing emergency lighting over convenience. Mr. Kealoha walked beside me, his posture straight and professional. He carried a sleek leather briefcase containing the physical copies of the digital transfers I had executed earlier that morning. The hallway was desolate. The usual bustling energy of administrative assistants and junior managers was entirely absent. The staff had evacuated hours ago, unwilling to endure the oppressive heat and the furious demands of stranded tourists in the lobby. The silence of the corridor felt heavy, thick with the impending culmination of my strategy. I approached the heavy oak double doors of the boardroom. I did not knock. I did not wait for an invitation to enter my own property. I pushed the brass handles downward. The heavy doors swung inward with a smooth, silent glide. A wave of stagnant, humid air washed over me. Jason and Patricia snapped their heads toward the entrance. They stood taller, adjusting their posture, expecting a team of faceless billionaires wearing sharp suits and carrying thick investment portfolios. They prepared to deploy their rehearsed charm and their fake smiles. Instead, they saw me. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, paired with structured trousers. The fabric was breathable and light. I looked fresh, collected, and entirely unbothered by the tropical heat radiating through the room. I stood in the doorway observing the physical degradation of my brother and my mother. They looked like terrified animals trapped in a gilded cage. Jason squinted, his initial confusion rapidly morphing into intense irritation. He wiped his forehead again with the damp handkerchief, smearing sweat across his brow. "Taylor, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone dripping with arrogant entitlement. "We are in the middle of a high-level corporate restructuring. This is a closed-door executive summit. You signed the severance release. Security should have escorted you off the premises yesterday." He looked past me, glaring at the attorney standing near my shoulder. "Kealoha, remove the former staff from this floor immediately," Jason ordered. "We are expecting vital investors, and I will not have her disrupting this transaction with her petty grievances." Mr. Kealoha did not move. He stood near the doorway, maintaining his neutral, professional stance. He offered Jason a blank stare, devoid of any subservience or obedience. The seasoned lawyer knew exactly who held the power in the room, and it was not the sweating man in the wrinkled suit. I did not blink. I did not offer a snappy comeback or defend my presence. Words are the tools of the desperate. Silence is the weapon of the prepared. I stepped fully into the room, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence against the exposed hardwood border of the floor. I walked past the side chairs reserved for junior executives and administrative note-takers. I glided alongside the massive expanse of the mahogany table. My eyes remained locked on Jason, tracking his every micro-expression. At the far end of the long table sat the premier leather chair. It was the seat designated for the chairman of the board. It was the specific seat Jason had pulled out earlier this morning, positioning it perfectly to accommodate the arrival of his wealthy savior. He had left it empty, a symbolic gesture of respect and submission for the faceless billionaire who was supposed to rescue his legacy. I reached the end of the table. I took the leather briefcase from Mr. Kealoha and set it gently on the polished wood. I grabbed the armrests of the heavy chair, pulled it backward, and sat down. I folded my hands, resting them on the cool mahogany. I looked directly down the length of the table at my brother. The transition in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Jason opened his mouth to issue another harsh reprimand, but the words died in his throat. His brain struggled to process the conflicting visual data. The discarded sister. The woman he legally evicted. The human calculator he blamed for his operational failures. She was sitting in the throne he had meticulously prepared for his rescuer. Patricia stopped pacing. Her designer handbag slipped from her fingers, landing on the plush carpet with a dull, heavy thud. She stared at me, her eyes widening as the terrifying puzzle pieces began to snap together in her mind. The mysterious private equity buyer who demanded the emergency meeting. The sudden, unexplainable transfer of the mezzanine debt. The precise, calculated timing of the software failures. She looked at Mr. Kealoha standing guard at the door like a silent sentinel, and then her gaze snapped back to me. The smugness drained from Jason's face like water rushing down an open drain. His jaw slackened. The arrogant sneer he wore during the reading of the will vanished entirely. His skin turned a pale, sickly shade of gray beneath his fading tan. He looked at the leather briefcase resting in front of me, and a visible tremor shook his shoulders. The room grew suffocatingly quiet. Jason realized the faceless corporate savior was never coming. The person sitting across from him was not here to negotiate a minority stake or offer a generous bridge loan. She was not here to save his public image or protect the family dynasty. The executioner had arrived, and she owned the block, the axe, in the ground he was standing on. The heavy silence inside the sweltering boardroom felt thick enough to suffocate. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, tracing the smooth grain of the wood with my fingertips. Jason stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. His brain misfired, unable to reconcile the sister he had discarded with the corporate predator currently occupying his boardroom. Patricia remained frozen near the window, her designer handbag resting near her feet where she had dropped it. The pristine image of her family dynasty stood on the edge of a sheer cliff. I reached over and flicked the brass latches of the leather briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks echoed through the quiet space. I flipped the lid open. I did not rush. I extracted the first stack of heavy bond paper and slid it down the length of the polished table. It stopped inches from his trembling hands. "Read it, Jason," I instructed, keeping my tone even and devoid of any emotional inflection. He looked down at the top page. Sweat dripped from his chin, staining the pristine white collar of his dress shirt. He picked up the document, his eyes darting across the dense legal paragraphs. The color drained further from his face, leaving a sickly ash-gray hue behind. That is a certified copy of the revocable living trust established by our father 2 years ago, I explained. David Hernandez knew you lacked the discipline to sustain a legacy. He knew you would take the shiny titles and the fast cars without ever checking the foundation. The will you heard in the law office gave you the physical structures. You own the drywall, the swimming pools, and the lobby chandeliers. But the trust gave me the commercial land deeds. I own the dirt beneath those structures. I hold the exclusive zoning rights for every single square inch of the Wailea beachfront. Jason dropped the paper as if the parchment had physically burned his fingers. That is impossible, he stammered, his voice thin and hollow. He left me the empire. He left you a rusted piece of junk in a safety deposit box. I pulled the oxidized brass key from my blazer pocket and placed it on the table. The rusted junk opened the vault containing the bedrock of your inherited kingdom, I replied. Jason turned toward the attorney standing near the doorway. Kealoha, tell her this is invalid, Jason pleaded, desperate for a legal loophole. You cannot sever the structures from the land without a formal subdivision hearing. Tell her she is wrong. Mr. Kealoha adjusted his glasses, offering a look of profound pity. The trust is ironclad, Jason. Your father executed the subdivision years before his passing. The transfer is legally binding, and the titles are fully registered with the state of Hawaii. You are currently operating a hospitality business on sovereign land owned entirely by your sister. The reality of his situation struck him, but the true devastation remained hidden inside the briefcase. I reached back into the leather compartment and retrieved the second stack of documents. These pages bore the official encrypted seals of the International Clearinghouse. I slid them across the table. They landed squarely on top of the trust papers. When you realized the vendors were walking out and the accounts were frozen, you panicked, I continued. You assumed you could charm a private equity syndicate into saving your public image. You thought a faceless billionaire was flying across the ocean to bail you out of your toxic mezzanine loan. Jason stared at the banking transfers, his chest heaving. The Nevada syndicate panicked when they saw my quiet title lien hit the county registry, I told him. They realized they issued an immense loan backed by real estate you did not actually possess. They were desperate to offload the distressed note before federal regulators audited their firm. So I bought it. I purchased your entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar using a corporate credit facility secured by my unencumbered land. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. You do not own an empire, Jason. You own a pile of bricks on my land, and you owe me $4 million for the privilege. A strangled gasp escaped his throat. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference chair. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. You cannot do this. You cannot buy my loan. That is illegal. It is insider trading. It is corporate sabotage. I will sue you. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. Lawsuits require capital, Jason, I reminded him softly. Your accounts are frozen and your credit lines are dead, but civil litigation is the least of your concerns right now. I reached into the small zippered compartment of the briefcase and pulled out the silver digital hard drive. I set it gently next to the rusted key. The metallic surface caught the harsh sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. You secured the mezzanine loan 3 years ago by signing a sworn affidavit of asset declaration, I said. You pledged the Wailea beachfront dirt as collateral. You leveraged an asset you did not own. That is federal bank fraud. Jason stopped shaking. His entire body went rigid. The threat of civil ruin was terrifying, but the specter of federal prison was paralyzing. And it gets worse, I added, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal whisper. While auditing the internal operating accounts, I found the hidden disbursement portals. I found the phantom invoices submitted by Aura Lifestyle Solutions. I have the digital routing numbers tracking the money you siphoned from the preventative maintenance budget to finance your luxury European vacations. Embezzling corporate funds to support a shell company is a severe felony. I have every single wire transfer saved on this drive. Patricia let out a quiet whimpering sound from the corner of the room. She knew exactly what else resided on that drive. She knew her own signature authorized the theft. Jason felt his legs finally give out. He collapsed into the leather chair he had intended for his savior. He bent forward, burying his face in his hands. His broad shoulders trembled fiercely as he began to hyperventilate. The confident, charismatic golden boy who laughed at my inheritance just days prior was gone. In his place sat a broken, desperate man, gasping for air inside a suffocating tropical oven. He had spent his entire life taking whatever he wanted, assuming the world would simply absorb the cost of his greed. He believed he was untouchable. He never realized that the person quietly balancing the ledgers in the back office held the power to destroy his entire universe. I watched him struggle to comprehend the scope of his failure. For 10 years, I had managed the intricate supply chains, the payroll disputes, and the relentless demands of a luxury hospitality brand. I had sacrificed my personal life, my sleep, and my youth to ensure our name remained synonymous with pristine island elegance. Jason had spent those same 10 years posing for photographs and draining the accounts I worked so hard to fill. He truly believed he was the rightful heir because society had always rewarded his charismatic smile while ignoring my quiet competence. The universe was finally correcting that prolonged imbalance. I withdrew the final document from the leather briefcase. It was a formal deed in lieu of foreclosure. I slid the thick contract down the table along with a heavy black ink pen. "Here is your only exit, Jason," I told him. "You will sign over the physical structures of the eco-resort to my holding company. You will relinquish your title as Chief Executive Officer and forfeit all remaining equity in the estate. The transfer of the buildings will satisfy the $4 million debt you owe me. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free." Jason lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot and brimming with panicked tears. "You are leaving me destitute," he choked out. "I have a wife. I have a reputation. You are taking everything." "I did not take anything, Jason," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "You gambled it away. You built a house of cards on top of a lie, and the wind finally blew. Now you have a choice. Sign the forfeiture document and leave this property today, or refuse, and I will hand this silver drive to the federal authorities before the sun sets. You can face the public humiliation of bankruptcy, or you can face a decade in a federal penitentiary." He stared at the black pen resting on top of the contract. His breathing was ragged, sounding like dry leaves crushing under heavy boots. He looked toward his mother, searching for a miracle. Patricia stood frozen, staring at the floor, unable to offer a single word of comfort or a secret cash settlement to make the nightmare vanish. The safety net was officially gone. Jason reached out with a trembling hand. His fingers fumbled, grasping the thick barrel of the pen. He pulled the document closer. A single tear escaped his eye, dropping onto the pristine paper, leaving a dark, wet stain near the signature line. He pressed the pen to the paper. His hand shook so fiercely he could barely form the letters of his own name. He signed the bottom of the first page. He flipped to the next section, signing again. The scratching sound of the ink against the paper filled the silent boardroom, a harsh auditory confirmation of his total defeat. When he reached the final page, he dropped the pen. It rolled across the mahogany table, stopping near the silver hard drive. The transfer of power was brutal thorough, and entirely legal. Jason had signed away his unearned kingdom. The physical structures now belonged to the owner of the dirt. The toxic debt was neutralized. The sprawling island empire was mine. I looked at the broken man slumped in the chair. He possessed no wealth, no leverage, and no dignity. He was a trespasser sitting inside my building. Yet the resolution felt incomplete. The architect of his entitlement still stood in the corner of the room, observing the wreckage she helped create. It was time to deal with Patricia. Jason sat slumped in the leather chair, a hollowed-out shell of a man. His chest rose and fell in shallow, jagged rhythms. The pen he used to sign away his unearned kingdom lay motionless near the center of the mahogany table. The brutal heat inside the boardroom seemed to press down on him, cementing his total defeat. I gathered the signed forfeiture documents, sliding them safely into my briefcase. The physical structures now legally belonged to my holding company. The debt was settled. But the toxic roots of my family dynamic still lingered in the room, waiting to be severed. Patricia stepped out of the shadows near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Throughout the entire confrontation, she had remained a silent spectator, watching her son and his empire crumble piece by piece. Now that Jason was neutralized, she activated her final defense mechanism. She approached the head of the table, her expensive heels sinking into the carpet. Her immaculate posture wavered. She allowed her shoulders to slump, projecting an image of sudden, tragic frailty. Tears began to pool in her eyes, spilling over her lower lashes and tracing damp paths through her pristine foundation makeup. It was a masterful performance. For decades, she had utilized weaponized grief to manipulate board members, local politicians, and forgiving relatives. She reached out, placing a trembling hand over mine. "Taylor, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured sorrow. "You have made your point. You proved you are the smartest person in the room. You saved the estate from the syndicate, but you cannot do this to your brother. You cannot strip him of his dignity." I looked down at her manicured fingers resting on top of my blazer sleeve. They felt cold. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her, waiting for the inevitable pitch. "We are a family," Patricia continued, her tears flowing faster now. "Family must protect family. Jason made some terrible choices, but he is still the public face of the Hernandez brand. The island expects him to lead. The society pages expect him to host the galas. If you throw him out onto the street, the scandal will ruin our reputation forever. Give him the chief executive title back. Let him keep the corner office. You can run the finances from behind the scenes, just like you always did. We can fix this together." She offered a fragile, hopeful smile. She genuinely believed her maternal tears could wash away 10 years of systematic abuse. She thought I would gladly return to the shadows and resume my role as the invisible workhorse as long as she offered me a few crumbs of fake affection. She assumed my desire for a mother approval would override my sense of self-preservation. During the reading of the will 3 days prior, I had looked to her for a shred of defense. She had stared back with icy indifference, telling me to be grateful I received a rusted key while Jason inherited the world. Her current weeping felt like an insult to my intelligence. It was a desperate calculation designed to protect her own access to the corporate treasury. I slowly withdrew my arm from beneath her grasp. I reached into the leather briefcase one final time. I did not pull out a legal contract or a bank deed. I extracted a single sheet of printer paper. It was a printed spreadsheet from the decrypted digital drive. I laid the paper flat on the polished wood, turning it so it faced her directly. Patricia looked down at the document. Her trembling lip stilled. "That is a ledger detailing the monthly disbursements to Aura Lifestyle Solutions," I explained, keeping my voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. It shows the exact routing numbers Jason used to siphon essential maintenance capital into a phantom corporation. It tracks the stolen money straight into a private checking account. Patricia swallowed hard. She tried to maintain her sorrowful expression, but the muscles in her face were tightening. The facade was slipping. Jason was desperate, she stammered. He did not know how to handle the pressure. Jason did not orchestrate the theft alone, I countered. Look at the right column, Mom. She lowered her gaze to the far edge of the spreadsheet. Printed in stark black ink were the digital authorization logs required to bypass my accounting firewalls. Her own electronic signatures were stamped next to every single fraudulent transfer. The transformation was instantaneous. The manufactured tears stopped flowing. The weeping facade evaporated, leaving behind a hardened, pale mask of sheer terror. Her posture snapped back into a rigid, upright stance as the crushing weight of her complicity crashed down upon her. She was no longer a grieving mother pleading for her son. She was a documented accomplice to a severe federal felony. You knew he was bleeding the resorts dry, I said, staring directly into her wide, panicked eyes. You knew the guest cabanas were rotting and the staff payrolls were stretched thin. You watched me work 60-hour weeks, agonizing over every utility bill, trying to keep this company afloat. And you actively signed off on the theft. You stole from the foundation to buy luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. You sacrificed my sanity to protect his illusion. Patricia opened her mouth, but no words materialized. The irrefutable proof lay on the table, rendering her usual manipulations entirely useless. She could not cry her way out of a digital paper trail. She could not charm a forensic audit. I protected this family for 10 years. I told them both, my voice ringing clear and steady through the sweltering boardroom. I sacrificed my youth to build a safety net you both treated like a hammock. When David Hernandez died, you tried to discard me. You handed me a rusted piece of metal and told me to be grateful. I got nothing. I picked up the printed spreadsheet and slid it back into the leather briefcase, closing the lid with a resounding snap. I locked the brass latches, securing the evidence inside. Now you can be grateful I am letting you walk away without handcuffs, I stated. The finality of the sentence struck them like a physical blow. There was no room for negotiation. There was no secret bank account they could drain to hire defense attorneys. They were entirely at my mercy, and my mercy only extended to their physical freedom. They would leave this property with the clothes on their backs and nothing else. I stood up from the executive chair. Leave my building, I ordered. Jason slowly pushed himself upward. His legs trembled under his own weight. He looked at the vast panoramic ocean view beyond the glass windows, seeing the paradise he had carelessly squandered. He did not look at me. He buttoned his ruined velvet jacket, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor, and shuffled toward the double doors. He moved with the slow, hesitant gait of a man who had just aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Patricia stood frozen for another few seconds, staring at the empty expanse of the mahogany table. She realized her social standing, her luxury penthouses, and her pristine reputation were gone forever. The elite circles of Honolulu would banish her the moment the rumors of bankruptcy and fraud began to circulate. She reached down and picked up her designer handbag. Her movements were stiff and uncoordinated. She turned around and followed her son out of the room. They did not scream. They did not hurl insults or threaten revenge. They possessed nothing left to fight with. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them, sealing the corridor. I remained standing at the head of the table. The stifling heat of the unventilated room still pressed against the glass, but I barely felt it. The chaotic noise of their entitlement, their lies, and their constant demands was gone. In its place, a profound, deafening silence settled over the boardroom. It was the sound of a toxic bond snapping permanently. It was the sound of a ledger finally balancing after a decade of severe deficits. I walked over to the windows, looking out at the sprawling Wailea coastline. The pristine white sand met the brilliant blue water bathed in the harsh, revealing light of the midday sun. The empire was stripped of its parasites. The foundation was secure. The final boundary was drawn in permanent ink. 6 months have passed since the heavy oak doors of the Wailea boardroom clicked shut, sealing the fate of my former family. The suffocating tropical heat that once paralyzed the executive suite is now just a distant memory. Today, a crisp Pacific breeze flows through the open floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying the faint, sweet scent of plumeria and saltwater. I stand on the private balcony of the newly renovated master office, holding a ceramic mug of locally sourced coffee. Below me, the Hernandez Eco Resort operates with the seamless, quiet precision of a well-oiled machine. The transformation of the property is a direct reflection of the financial restructuring. When you remove a parasite, the host naturally flourishes. The toxic mezzanine debt is erased from the corporate ledgers. The operating accounts are healthy, robust, and protected by multi-layered security protocols that cannot be bypassed by a forged signature. The proprietary software I built continues to govern the daily logistics without a single system failure. Down in the pristine marble lobby, guests are greeted with genuine smiles from staff members who now receive premium wages and full healthcare benefits. The frontline workers no longer bear the brunt of executive incompetence. The local Hawaiian vendors, who form the true backbone of our island hospitality, are thriving. Makana, the towering organic farmer who once led a protest in our reception area, just renewed a 5-year exclusive supply contract with our fine dining restaurants. His invoice is clear every Friday morning with automated, flawless regularity. The mutual trust between the estate and the local ecosystem is fully restored. The business is not just surviving. It is setting the industry standard for the entire archipelago. While the resort basks in a golden renaissance, the architects of the previous decay are navigating a vastly different reality. The universe has a remarkable sense of irony, often delivering poetic justice with surgical precision. 20 miles away from the luxurious Wailea coastline, near the industrial hum of the Honolulu International Airport, sits a modest budget motel. A flickering neon sign illuminates the cracked asphalt parking lot, buzzing with a harsh electrical drone. Makana recently purchased a minor investment stake in this specific franchise, diversifying his agricultural portfolio. Behind the scuffed laminate reception desk stands Jason. My brother no longer wears bespoke Italian suits or imported silk ties. His current uniform consists of a stiff, scratchy polyester polo shirt, a shade of pale yellow that washes out his fading tan. A cheap plastic name tag rests crookedly on his chest. He works the overnight shift, checking in exhausted budget travelers and flight crews facing delayed departures. He spends his nights dealing with broken ice machines, malfunctioning key cards, and the relentless complaints of guests demanding immediate refunds. He faces the exact operational nightmares he once carelessly inflicted upon our Wailea staff. Only now, he does not possess the authority to retreat to a corner office or order a manager to fix the problem. He must stand behind the counter, swallow his pride, and apologize to the angry customers. He earns a minimum wage paycheck that barely covers the rent for his cramped studio apartment, situated directly under the airport flight path. Ashley is gone. The superficial bond of their marriage shattered the very second the corporate credit lines died. She recognized the sinking ship and secured a life raft for herself. She filed the divorce paperwork before the week ended, packing her designer bags and fleeing to the mainland. She managed to hide a small cache of cash from their joint accounts, taking whatever scraps she could carry. She left Jason to navigate the humiliating wreckage of his fabricated empire entirely alone. Patricia resides in a similar state of permanent exile. She leases a tiny one-bedroom walk-up apartment on the dense, noisy outskirts of the city. The elite social circles she ruthlessly prioritized have entirely erased her existence. In Honolulu high society, irrelevance is the ultimate punishment. Her phone never rings with invitations to charity galas or exclusive real estate luncheons. When she attempted to attend a public botanical garden fundraiser 2 months ago, the event coordinators politely but firmly turned her away at the entrance. The relationship between my mother and my brother is permanently severed. Stripped of his wealth and his unearned prestige, Jason searched for a scapegoat. He directed his bitter resentment toward Patricia, blaming her for failing to produce a secret financial rescue during his darkest hour. Without the connective tissue of stolen money and shared delusions, their familial tie simply disintegrated. They live on the same island, but they exist oceans apart, isolated in their respective failures. I take a slow sip of my coffee, watching a pod of dolphins break the surface of the turquoise water in the distance. The sun warms my face. The sheer beauty of the morning offers a stark contrast to the heavy internal reflections that often accompany victory. Society places an immense, unyielding pressure on women to forgive. We are conditioned from a young age to act as the emotional glue for broken people. We are expected to absorb disrespect, endure manipulation, and quietly mend the fractured pieces of our families in the name of unconditional love. When you refuse to play that assigned role, when you drop the glue and walk away, the initial fallout is terrifying. I am now an orphan. By choice. There is a distinct, unique gravity to that phrase. Cutting off the toxic elements of your bloodline does not result in an immediate parade of joy. It creates a vast, echoing void. The holiday seasons are profoundly quiet. There are no chaotic family dinners, no shared childhood nostalgia, no incoming phone calls on Sunday afternoons. When you execute a hard boundary, you lose the people who remember you as a child. You lose the shared history. In the early weeks following the boardroom checkmate, I would sometimes sit in my apartment and feel the phantom limb of my family. A sudden sharp pang of doubt would strike my chest. I would wonder if my retribution was too severe. I would question if I could have restructured the debt and saved the company, while allowing Jason to keep a minor ceremonial title. I would wonder if I could have forgiven my mother for her complicity. But then I would look at the rusted brass key resting on my desk. I kept the key. I placed it inside a small glass display box, framing it as a permanent reminder of the truth. That key represented their genuine perception of my worth. It symbolized the decades of unpaid overtime, the silent disrespect, and the sheer audacity of their greed. They did not love me. They loved the convenience of my labor. Forgiving them would not have healed the family. It would have simply authorized them to find a new method to drain my energy. I realize now that the vast echoing void is not loneliness. It is peace. The silence that fills my life is the sound of safety. It is the absence of anxiety. It is the profound relief of waking up every morning knowing I do not have to rescue an arrogant brother from his own incompetence or earn the affection of a mother who views me as a disposable asset. I step back from the balcony railing and walk into my spacious executive office. The mahogany desk is clear, organized, and ready for the daily operational briefings. I take my seat in the heavy leather chair. It fits perfectly. True worth is never handed down in a legal dossier or assigned by an arrogant sibling. Dignity is not inherited. It is forged in the quiet, windowless rooms where you hone your skills while others play. It is built through the meticulous, disciplined accumulation of knowledge and leverage. If you find yourself trapped in a dynamic where your competence is exploited and your presence is ignored, remember the architecture of this story. Stop begging for validation from people who are standing on a foundation you built. Stop trying to negotiate for a small broken chair at a table designed to exclude you. Gather your resources, document the truth, and study the bedrock. Sometimes the only way to build a table of your own is to chop up the one you were never allowed to sit at. I opened my laptop, entering my secure administrative credentials. The screen illuminates, displaying a thriving green dashboard of thousands of active guests arriving from across the globe. The Hernandez Eco Resort is alive, secure, and profitable. The rusted key sits in its glass box on the edge of the desk, catching the Hawaiian sunlight. The audit is officially closed, and the future belongs entirely to the architect. We often look at the ruins of a family empire and ask where the money went. We trace the electronic bank transfers, audit the corporate ledgers, and scrutinize the legal loopholes to find the exact moment of failure. But total collapse is rarely born from a simple, isolated accounting error. It is born in the nursery. It is cultivated at the kitchen table. The collapse of the Hernandez dynasty, the shattered luxury resorts, the frozen bank accounts, and the humiliating public executions of ego, was not ultimately a story about corporate sabotage or toxic mezzanine debt. It was a story about the profound, quiet, and devastating failures of parenting. When we peel back the layers of real estate and cold revenge, we uncover a raw, unflinching mirror reflecting the deepest vulnerabilities of how we raise our children. When we examine the wreckage of Jason's unearned inheritance, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about modern American family culture. In our relentless pursuit of the American dream, we often confuse the shiny aesthetics of success with the moral character required to actually sustain it. Patricia, the matriarch, fell into the most seductive and destructive trap of traditional parenting. She believed that protecting her child from consequences was the ultimate expression of maternal love. When Jason failed his university exams, she bought his way out with expensive tutors. When he crashed sports cars, she paid for the silence. When he embezzled company funds, she provided the digital authorization to hide his crimes. She raised a boy to believe that his charismatic smile, his tailored suits, and his prestigious family name were sufficient currency to purchase the world. But shielding a child from failure does not insulate them from the harsh realities of the world. It merely leaves them entirely defenseless when the world inevitably pushes back. By refusing to let Jason feel the sting of his own mistakes, Patricia did not build a strong, capable leader. She built a fragile, hollow shell of a man. She robbed him of the crucial opportunity to develop true grit, moral resilience, and authentic self-worth. In American culture, where self-reliance is heavily romanticized, yet generational wealth is often fiercely protected, we frequently witness this exact tragedy. We hand our children the keys to massive, complex empires they do not know how to run, expecting them to magically acquire the discipline, work ethic, and emotional fortitude of their ancestors. Conversely, traditional family structures often harbor a darker, unspoken dynamic, the silent exploitation of the competent child. While Jason was groomed from birth to be the glittering centerpiece of the family table, Taylor was designated as the invisible structural support. She was the workhorse. She was the permanent safety net. In families that lack genuine emotional awareness, the quiet, responsible child is often taken for granted. Their daily sacrifices are expected rather than appreciated. Fundamental fairness is entirely discarded in favor of maintaining a comfortable, aesthetically pleasing status quo. Parents like Patricia and David Hernandez looked at their daughter and saw only utility and output, conveniently forgetting that immense competence does not negate the human need for validation, basic respect, and unconditional love. This brings us to the father's brutal, posthumous lesson. David Hernandez's decision to secretly divide his estate, giving the hollow buildings to his son and the sovereign bedrock to his daughter, was undeniably brilliant. It was a masterclass in corporate strategy and leverage, but as a foundational parenting philosophy, it was a tragic, glaring admission of failure. David knew his son was a charismatic parasite, and he knew his daughter was a brilliant architect. Yet instead of addressing these glaring character flaws and family inequities with honesty and emotional presence while he was alive, he orchestrated a delayed detonation. He used his own death to forcefully enact the fairness and accountability he had failed to cultivate in his own living room. He left behind a rusted key to teach a profound lesson about the value of foundations. But one must wonder, what if he had simply taught his children the value of the dirt while he was still standing on it with them? Raising children requires an agonizing daily balance of grace and strict accountability. It demands an acute, unwavering emotional awareness to recognize exactly when we are enabling destructive behavior and when we are blindly overlooking quiet dedication. Honesty in parenting does not just mean telling your children the truth about how the external world works. It means telling them the hard, uncomfortable truths about themselves. It means having the immense courage to let your child fail, to let them scrape their knees, and to let them feel the crushing weight of their own bad decisions. True family responsibility is not about providing a perpetual financial parachute. It is about providing a moral compass that points toward integrity, even when it hurts. The dynamics of the Hernandez family are extreme, but the emotional undercurrents are universally familiar. If this story of hidden resentment, the heavy burden of unacknowledged loyalty, and the ultimate severing of toxic bonds resonates with a quiet, hidden part of your own life, you are certainly not alone. We all navigate the complex, often painful landscapes of familial expectation, deep-seated entitlement, and the terrifying process of drawing hard boundaries. For more deeply personal narratives that explore the hidden truths of our closest relationships and the psychological landscapes we all must traverse, please follow Intimately Told Stories. We are dedicated to sharing the raw, unfiltered experiences that shape us, break us, and ultimately teach us how to rebuild ourselves from the ground up. As we reflect on Taylor's arduous journey from a discarded, invisible sister to a sovereign, independent architect, we are left to grapple with a powerful, unsettling realization. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned by society to believe that blood is the thickest, most sacred bond. We are taught that family loyalty is an unbreakable moral imperative, and that a parent's ultimate defining duty is to provide a soft, comfortable landing for their offspring, regardless of their actions. We are told over and over again to forgive every transgression, to turn the other cheek, and to endlessly mend the bridges that our relatives continuously set on fire, all in the name of shared DNA and traditional values. But perhaps conventional wisdom has been lying to us all along. Perhaps the traditional script we have been handed is fundamentally flawed. Sometimes the most profound, deeply moral act of love a parent can commit is not to build a towering, impenetrable castle for their child, but to step back and let their unearned empire burn entirely to the ground. And sometimes the healthiest, most vital choice a child can ever make is to stop trying to heal a family that vastly prefers them broken. Blood does not automatically entitle anyone to your sanity, your peace of mind, or the fruits of your life's work. True loyalty cannot be inherited in a legal will, nor can it be mandated by a birth certificate. It must be earned, day by day, through honesty and mutual respect on solid ground. Look closely at the people sitting around your own dining table tonight. Are they truly sharing the meal with you? Or are they quietly, methodically, carving up the foundation beneath your feet? The answer you find in the silence just might change the way you look at the ground you stand on tomorrow.